In this video, we're gonna build a full-stack mobile application that works on your actual physical device, that is either Android or iOS. It even works in the simulator on your laptop. This is possible thanks to React Native and Expo, which is something that we'll get into the details a little bit later in the video. I cannot wait to start coding this project with you, but first let me give you a quick walkthrough of the end result so that you know what we are building in this tutorial. So this is an expense tracker app that I called as wallet, and in total we have 5 different screens, which are sign up, login, verify email, home, and create screen. The first thing you need is to sign up to be able to see the home screen. Now for the sign up, we have an email verification step where you will get a 6-digit code in your inbox, and once you fill that correctly, then you will be redirected to the home page. And initially you will not have any past transactions, so you can visit the create screen where you can add some transactions that are either expenses or income. And we have a couple of different categories, and depending on your transactions, your current balance will be updated, and you can delete these transactions as well. I will also show you how to add this classic refresh functionality from scratch. And finally, we can log out, which will navigate us to the login screen. So this is the entire application. I'll explain every single step so that you can easily follow along with me from start until the end. Now you don't have to own a MacBook to be able to follow along with this tutorial, because I'll show you how to run this app on your physical device. First, we are gonna build our backend where we have an Express API that is connected to a Postgres database on the cloud that is provided by Neon. And once we build our API, we're going to deploy it, and then we will start building our mobile application with React Native and Expo. For the authentication, we'll be using Clerk with the email and password combination. And in this tutorial, we will talk about something called rate limiting, which is a concept that you should definitely know. And we will implement that using Redis as our secondary database, which is also hosted on the cloud. So overall, this is the entire tutorial. I'll assume you have never used React Native before, so that you can follow along with me from start until the end without getting confused. But of course, I'll assume you know the basics of React, like what is a component, state, useEffect, and JSX. That's it. Everything we use in this tutorial is completely free to get started with, so you don't have to pay for anything that we use. So with all that being said, if you're ready, let's get into it. This course doesn't cost you anything, so if you would like to support my work, you can subscribe, leave a like, and add a random comment for the algorithms. I would really appreciate it. And one last quick announcement, if you're interested in web development, I have a Udemy course with over 100 hours of content that includes 25 real-world projects, like building a LinkedIn clone, Spotify, Netflix, Tinder, Amazon, and even mobile applications that work on both iOS and Android devices. This is the cheapest course that you can ever get, and the best part is I am updating this course every single month with new projects. The discount link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, and let's get started. So to get started with, I have created an empty folder on my desktop called React Native Wallet. You can call this anything that you wish. Just go ahead and open this up in VS Code. Now we are gonna need 2 different folders, one for the backend and the other one for the mobile application, right? So the front end, but I'd like to call this as mobile. So here we will build the React Native application, but that's gonna be a little bit later in the video. First, we'd like to build the backend. So here we'll build an API. If you don't want to watch the backend part, maybe you already know how to build it, you can just copy this entire folder from the source code and skip to the mobile section, but I would say just stick around so that you can see the entire process. Okay, now we would like to initialize a Node.js application under the backend. I will open up my terminal, and the shortcut is Command J or Control J. Okay, I'll say cd into the backend. If you type some part of it and press tab, it'll be completed. Now let's say npm init-y, which is going to give us a package.json file where we can install our packages. So I'll say npm install express, which is the web framework that we'll use. And if you don't know what that means, I'll explain in a second. But by default, this is going to install the version 5. So let's actually see this in action. I will install it. Now here you can see Express version 5 has been installed, but this version just came out, and I think it is not really stable completely. So what I'd like to do is to use the version 4, which is a lot more stable. Now don't ever feel like this tutorial is outdated. Not at all. The entire world still using Express version 4. There isn't any much changes, but I think we should be a little bit more stable, right? We should use the stable version so that this tutorial is working completely as expected for a very, very long time. Okay, so I'll clear up my terminal and I'll say install Express, but with the version 4.21.0. Okay. So once again, this tutorial is not outdated. Don't ever feel like that. This is just a lot more stable version that we'll be using. Okay, just go ahead and do this. Once you are done with it, we can install other packages. So I will get, let's say, npm install.env to be able to access our environment variables. If you don't know what that means, we'll see this in action as well. And then let's get the course to be able to get rid of the course errors. And then to be able to connect to our database, we'll use Neon database. So just make sure to put add at the beginning. So Neon database / let's say serverless. And if you wanted to add specific versions, just go ahead, say something like 1.0.0 and do the same thing for course. Here I'll say I think 2.8.5, and for the .env we'll say 16.5.0. So this is the entire line. Okay, just go ahead and run this. Now you would like to install the same versions as I do, so that if you're watching this video in a future date, your code should still work as I have. Okay, so once you have done this, we can get started with it. First, let's create a simple server.js file. And here, let's try to import Express. I'll say const, if I can type, let's say Express. We'll say require the Express package. Now, this is the old way of doing it. This is an old syntax. It's completely fine, but instead of this, I'd like to use this syntax. I'd like to say import Express from Express. And to be able to make this work, we need to visit package.json, and here at some point, you would like to add the type to be module. By default, it is common.js, as you can tell, but once you say it'll be module, you can use import export syntax. Now we don't really need to use this one. Okay, now let's say create an Express app, and we can listen on a port. I'll say app.listen. In my case, it'll be 5001. And once we start listening, we can say put a console log, say server is up and running on port, and let's put the port next to it, which is 5001. Okay, let's try to run this file under the backend. Just say run the server.js with the node. Okay, so as you can tell, it is working correctly. Now let's add a route. I'll say app.get. If we visit localhost 5001, we would like to run this function where by default we get the request and response, and we can say res.send something like it's working. Now kill this with Control-C and then run this again. And just test this out under localhost 5001. Okay, so it is working as expected. Now we just said that Express is the web framework, but what does that mean? So I have some diagrams, let's try to go over them. Now a web framework is a ready-to-use toolbox for building web applications a lot faster and a lot more easily. So basically at the end of the day, you don't really want to reinvent the wheel, right? You would like to use a web framework because it saves time and it makes your code a lot more cleaner and more organized, and it handles all the common tasks that you can imagine, like routing, error handling, middleware, so on and so forth. So someone already built a web framework for you, such as the Express team, so we can just use it instead of building our entire new web framework. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is exactly what we are trying to do. So now that we know what a web framework is, let's talk about the API pretty quickly and then we'll get started by building it, right? Now you will probably already know this, but let's try to remember it pretty quickly. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, which sounds a little bit complicated, but in simple terms, it allows two different applications talk to each other, right? And APIs are all around us. So when you send a mobile payment, basically you are using an API behind the scenes without even realizing. So let's see. Okay, so we have a client, we have a front-end application that could be either your mobile app or your desktop app, your web application, whatever that is, right? So you simply have a front-end app that would like to talk with a backend. So let's say you would like to fetch some data, you would like to get some data, and you have the API in middle, which is going to talk with the database. So at the end of the day, you have two different apps, right? One front end and one back end. And API allows both of them to talk to each other, right? So I hope that makes sense. Probably this is something that you already know, but it's nice to go over it. And we have a bunch of different requests. So we will be building a REST API. So we have get, we have post, which is something that you would use when you need to create something. In this case, we will create some transactions. Then we have a delete method, where you would like to delete some data, as the name suggests. And then we have the put method. You could use it when you want to update some data in the database. Okay. So I hope all that makes sense. Now let's get started with it under the server.js file. Now, if you have realized, every single time we change something, we need to kill the server and rerun this again. This is really annoying. Instead, we could install a package. I'll say npm install -d nodemon. So this is going to be like -d means development, development dependency, right? Dev dependency. So we installed nodemon. So here, now we can add a script. Let's say dev, delete this part. We will say you're going to run the server.js file, but this time with nodemon. Now let's see what that means. You can open up your terminal. Let's clear this up. I'll say npm run dev. So this is going to run it with nodemon, which means it is watching for changes. Whenever you change something, so I'll say 1, 2, 3, save this file, it is going to restart all over again. So you don't really need to kill this and restart again. I hope that makes sense. Now, what I'd like to do is to create my .env file so that I can put my port and my environment variables. So here I'll say 5001. To be able to use it, we can say process.env. Let's first console log it. I'll say process.env.port, but now this will be undefined. So I'll just say my port. If you take a look at the terminal, it'll be undefined by default. To be able to get the value, you need to use this package that we have installed, which is called .env. So you would say import .env from the .env package, and then you would call the config method. So once you have done this, you can actually get that value from the file. Right now, this is not really undefined. If you change it and save this file, it'll be updated. Okay, now let's go and put the previous value. And here, instead of 5001, I'd like to use my port. Here I'll say const port. Let's say process.env.port. And here I'll just put that port environment variable. And let's say this is going to be dynamic. Okay, and just in case if this is undefined, we can fold this back with 5001, just like this. But as you might know already, the main usage of .env file is for secrets, right? Let's say you have your database connection URL, which is something that we will have. So you would like to put it right here. Let's say database underscore URL, and then whatever the value is. You don't really want to put this database connection string to your code base. So you don't really want to say something like connect database and then put your connection string. So whatever that is, you don't really want to put it as a string. Instead, you would like to get it from the environment variables so that when you push your code to GitHub, nobody can see it. It is under your .env file, and you don't really push this code to GitHub, right? This is only this is locally placed in your machine, in your backend folder. We'll just see this in action, but for now, this is going to be it for this section. Let's try to delete this one from here. In the next section, we are going to connect to our database. And by the way, it's 7 a.m. in the morning. I just got my coffee, recording this video, so you have no reason to be unmotivated. With that, I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so this is where we left. In the previous section, we built the server.js file, and now we would like to connect to our database, which is going to be a Postgres database that is provided by Neon. You can find the link in the description. We'll go ahead and sign up. They have a free plan. So this is exactly what we'll be doing. They are the Postgres provider. They will give us a free Postgres database that we can use, and it is already hosted on the cloud. So we'll just get a connection string that we can connect to it. And as I said, they have a really generous free plan. We can get up to 10 projects without paying anything. And if you would like to scale your projects, you can obviously go with the paid plan. Now, what I'll be doing is to go ahead and log in. I already have an account, so I'll log in with my GitHub account, and let's create a new project. Now, I am on the paid plan, but it's completely fine if you're on the free plan. You don't need to upgrade at all for this project at least. Okay, so I'll say create a new project. We can call this anything. I'll just say wallet, or let's say React Native wallet. I'll leave everything as it is. I'll say create, and we can say connect to our database. So we got the connection string that I'd like to copy. Please don't try to use mine because I'll delete it once I publish this video. I'll go ahead under the .env file, and I'll say database underscore URL and paste this in. Okay, just save this. This should be good to go. Now I will create a config folder, and under this we'll have the db.js file. So this is the file where we can connect to our database. Here I'll go ahead first import the Neon from the package that we have installed in the first section. So it is this package, and we would like to get the .env as well. So I'll say import .env/config. So this is another way of using it. In the previous file, we just imported that and then called the config method. So this is the exact same thing. Now they both have different usages, but in this case, this will work as expected. And then we can create a SQL connection using our environment variable. So I'll say export const SQL, and this is something that we'll be using a lot. For now, just say call the Neon function with the process.env.database underscore URL. Okay, that should be it. We'll be using this, and let me just add a comment. So I'll say this will create, let's say creates. So this creates a SQL connection using our database URL. And this is a function that we'll be using to be able to write some SQL queries safely. Okay, so let's save. We'll go into the server.js file and we can import it. So before we start our app, we can create a function. So I'll just go right here. Maybe we can delete this, or maybe above that, I'll say create an async function. The name could be something like init database, right? Initialize the database. We don't really need to get any parameters, so I'll just delete that. And now let's have a try and catch block. Under the try, we would like to create a transactions table, right? We will store things like the amount, category, title, so on and so forth. So I will say await because this will take a little bit of time, and let's import the SQL. Just make sure to put .js at the end. Now it is worth mentioning that in this tutorial, we'll not be using any ORMs, we will just write some raw SQL code. So we are not going to be using something like Prisma or Drizzle. We'll just write some raw SQL code, and the reason for this is that most of the tutorials would use something like ORM, and I want this to be a little bit different, where we can use some raw SQL and just see how that works. Now, it doesn't really mean that ORMs are bad. They're actually really convenient. In my previous tutorials, I have used Prisma a lot, so you can check them out if you are really interested. So this tutorial will be a little bit more simple, where we can write some raw SQL code. As your projects get larger, I wouldn't really recommend this. So it could be really hard, but in this case, it's going to be really convenient for us. And we don't really need to, go into the steps to set up an ORM like Drizzle or Prisma. So I hope that makes sense. And it is worth mentioning that. So if you have used something like MongoDB in the past, it is a NoSQL database, which means you store the data under the collections. But in this case, we'll be using Postgres, which is a SQL database, and instead of collections, we have tables. So basically, we store the data under the tables where we have rows and columns, right? So this is an example screenshot that I took. So this is the products table, and we have some columns such as ID, name, price, so on and so forth. And then we have some rows, and every single row is a different document, right? So this is a product, this is another one, so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to mention this before we get started. Okay, so let's go into the server.js file and get started with our very first SQL code. So you would like to open up these backticks. So this is not code, okay? So they are backticks. And let's say something like create, all uppercase. I'll say create table, which is going to be transactions. Now we'll like to create this only if it not exists already, right? So I'll say if not exists, only then create it. We don't really want to create this again and again. Now here I'll say every single transaction will have an ID, and this could be in the serial as well as the primary key. I'll say primary key. So that means we can identify a transaction with their IDs. Okay, and then we can have a user ID. That means every transaction will be associated with a user, right? So if you create a transaction, I don't really want to see it. I only want to see the transactions that are created by me, right? So that's why we'll say user ID, and this is going to be type of string. We can say varchar, and we can put this value, and we'll say this cannot be null. And then we will have the title for every single transaction. It'll be basically the same thing. So I would like to copy it and paste it. We can duplicate this. Now we'll have the amount. So let's say this will be amount. Instead of string, this could be decimal, and we'll say 10, and then we'll just put 2 next to it. Then we can get the category. I'll go ahead and say every transaction will have a category. This is going to be varchar as well, right? It'll be a string, and we can put this value. So at maximum, it can get this amount of characters. And then finally, we can add a created at field, and let's say this will be type of date. It cannot be null, and then we'll say by default it'll just take the current date. So whenever you create a transaction, this field will be automatically created, and it'll be whatever the current date is. Okay, and then we can say something like console log database initialized successfully. And then in the catch, of course, we can just say error initializing database, and we can put the error message, so whatever that is. And then we can exit the process with failure. So say exit, the status code 1 means failure, right? So say status code 1 means failure, and 0 means success. Since we are in the catch block, it'll be 1, which means failure, right? And then we can now call this function, because this by itself doesn't do anything. We just created it, but we need to call it. And I'll say, first, just cut this for a split second. And I'll say initialize the database. Once it is done successfully, then just go ahead, run this function where we have where we are listening for the this application, right? We are starting it only if the database initialized. Okay, let's save, open up the terminal. Looks like database initialized successfully. And let's see this under the tables. So just go ahead, click to the tables. And let's see if we are gonna get any tables. Looks like we got, this is called as transactions. And we have all these fields. So we have ID, user ID, title, everything up until the created at. And we are able to see the type for all of them. So the serial for ID means is that it's going to be incremented one by one. So the very first document is going to be ID of 1, and then 2, 3, so on. Okay, now let's try to create an error. I'll go ahead under the .env and for my password. So this is your password, this is your username. Here I'll just put a character so that my password is wrong. And let's save this. We're going to hit the error case. And let's scroll to the top. It says error initializing the database, right? And the error is the authentication failed, basically. Okay, so this is something I wanted to mention. If you don't really put the correct database URL, it's going to fail. But if you put the correct one and save your file, it should be good to go. And just one more thing. So here I just said decimal 10 and comma 2. Now what does that mean? Let me just add a comment and read it out loud. So let me format this. Okay, so this basically means a fixed point number with 10 digits in total and 2 digits after the decimal point. So basically this means that the maximum value it can store will be this value. So we have 8 at maximum in the before the decimal, and in total it is going to be 10 digits, right? Here we have 10 digits. The decimal point could be up to 2, and then in total it is 10. So I hope that makes sense. This is something that you can keep in mind. And just before we end this section, so now that we got our environment variables, let's set up the Clerk as well, which is the authentication service, the authentication provider that we'll be using. So I'll go ahead and visit. You can find the link in the description. So Clerk will be our user management platform, and they have really cool components that we can use without really doing that much. So we can basically add all kinds of authentication options to our application. And in our case, we'll be using email and password. So just go ahead, create an account. I think I already have, so I'd like to log in. Let me just log in with the Google account that I have. And we can create an application. So I'll say create the app. Name could be something like React Native Wallet, or just wallet. It's not really that important. And for the options, you can add anything that you wish. I'll just go with the email password combination. Okay, let's say create the app, and they have all kinds of SDKs. We'll be using the Expo, but for now, just go ahead and get the environment variable. In the incoming sections, we'll go through these steps under the mobile application, right? Under the mobile folder. But for now, I'd like to put the environment variable right here, and this is something that we'll use later in the video. Okay, so with that, I think that's gonna be it for this section. I'll see you in the next one. Alright, so this is where we left. Now we would like to go ahead and get started with the API, right? So we have this function where we initialize the database and connect to it, but now it is time to add our endpoints. So I'd like to delete this one. Instead of get request, let's say we'll have a post method, right? A post request where we can create a transaction. So the endpoint is going to be /API/transactions, where we'll get the request and response, and we'll do something, right? And that something will be creating something in the database, and specifically creating a transaction in the database. Now I will mark this as async. And one more thing to mention, First, we will do this in the most beginner-friendly way, okay? So we'll put everything under the server.js file. Once you are done with it, we'll go ahead and optimize our code base where we can have a better file and folder structure. For now, I'll just keep it simple and just put everything on this file, and then we will optimize it. Okay, so first let's create the try and catch block. In the try, we can try to get the fields that user wants to send. So if user wants to create a transaction, they would like to send the title, right? They would like to send the amount, the category, as well as the user ID. So we would like to get all these values, and we can get this from request.body, and we'll say basically destructure all these values. Let's say title, amount, category, as well as the user ID. Now we would like to get these values, but we can only do so if we use this middleware. So let's say app.use, and just go ahead, call the express.json. So this is what we call a middleware. This is a built-in middleware actually. Now you might be asking, what does that mean? This sounds really complicated. I have never heard of it. So let's try to see it pretty quickly. I have some diagrams right here. So middleware is just a function. So nothing else, it is just a function, but it runs in the middle between the request and response. So let's say you sent a request from the client, from your mobile application, web application, whatever that is. You sent a request, right? And just before you get a response back, they can do something in middle. This could be an authentication check. It could be some console log. It can be anything. And let's try to actually build our own simple middleware, right? So like first I will delete this, right? Comment this out, and I'll get the app.get. So you don't have to follow along. I'm just trying to show you this. So I'll say we'll get the request and response, and just say something like res.send, it's working. Just before we get this response, we can put something on the terminal. So I'll say use this middleware. This is our custom simple middleware. Okay, so we'll get the request and response, as well as what we call the next function. So here I'll say just console log, hey, we hit a request, and here is the method. So I'll say the method is, and you can put request.method next to it. Once we console log this, we can call the next function. So let me pretty quickly explain. When we send a get request, let's do it. I'll save. So this will make sense just in a second. Let's say localhost 5001. When we send a get request, just before we get the response back, we would like to put a console log, right? Once we have the console log, we are going to call the next function, which is this one, that is going to send the response, right? So just before you send the response, you would like to do something, which is this console log. Here we can see. So I'll just refresh again. We sent the request. Just before we get the response, we are going to hit this console log, which is coming from our middleware. I'd like to put this as a comment. Let's say our custom simple middleware. And this is exactly what is happening in this case. Just before you send the response, you are basically accessing the request.body. If you don't add this middleware, these are going to be undefined. So I hope all that makes sense. This is something that you should keep in mind. And once again, middleware is really important when you want to have an authentication check. So let's say user sent a request, they would like to create something, right? Let's say you are on Instagram, they would like to create a post. First, you need to check if they are authenticated or not. So you would have your auth check right here under the middleware function. If they are not authenticated, you'll say, hey, sorry, you cannot create the post. But if they are authenticated, then they can create the post. So I hope that makes sense. This is something that you can keep in mind, and I'll delete these drawings. Okay, now that we got all these values, we can just check if they are provided or not. So we'll say if there is no title or if there is no user ID, then let's do the same thing for the rest. Let's say no category, or let's say if there is no amount. But now this could be equal to 0, right? Maybe amount is 0. So instead of saying not, we'll say if it is equal to undefined. In this case, we'll just say throw an error, right? I'll say return out of this function, send a response back with the status code of 400, which means there is an error. And I'll say JSON. The message could be something like all fields are required. Okay, now let's save and we can get move on with it. And under the catch, I'd like to say, error in the, let's say, I don't know, let's just say error creating the transaction, and we can put the error into the terminal. And since we hit the catch block, probably it means that there is an error on the server side. So I'll say res.status. The status code will be 500, and let's say JSON. We can say something like internal error. Okay, so we just got the message itself, and let's move on in the case that we created successfully. So here I'll say await, get the SQL function, and again some backticks. We'll basically say insert into, let's say insert into the transactions table, and we would like to add these values, right? We would like to update the user ID column, we would like to update the title, let's say amount, as well as the category. Now we don't need to put the created at, it'll be added automatically, because here we said by default just get the current date. Okay, so these are the fields, but let's say the values will be whatever user passes, right? So here I'll say just get the user ID, and just make sure that it is in the same order that you have here. So user ID, title, amount, and category. So I'll say title, put a comma, and then let's say get the amount, and then the category itself. Okay, so once we insert it, we would like to assign this into a variable called transaction. And to be able to get this, you need to say returning. Just return every single field, right? Every single column. And then we can say res.status 201, which means something created. And then we'll say as the response, we'll say JSON transaction. This will be an array, so we'd like to get the first value, which is the created transaction. So if you don't know what I mean, let's put the transaction into the terminal and now test this out. So to be able to test this out, I'll be using a desktop application called Postman. So you can install it or use something else. This is the one that I'll be using. You don't need to sign up. Just go ahead, click to this button where you will create a new request. It'll be get request to, let's say, http localhost 5001 and /API/transactions. And I think I just said get request, but it should be a post request because we are trying to create something. Here I'll go ahead and say post request. Under the body, just choose row and JSON, where we would like to add all these fields. So for now, for the user ID, I'll put something random. Later in the video, this is going to be coming from Clerk. So let's say user ID, let's add a title. Let's say something like maybe salary. And the category could be income. And what else do we have? I think it is description. No, it's amount. Okay, so let's say we'll have the amount could be something like 2000. I think it's going to be a number, right? So let's not wrap it with the quotes. Okay, I'll just send the request. Looks like it has been created. We got 201. Let's take a look at the database. So here under the dashboard, I'll say refresh. We should have our very first document. Okay, that means it is working correctly. Now, if we try to create something else, without passing the amount. So I'll say send the request. It says all fields are required. And this would be the case if we don't add any of these fields. Okay, now let's bring this back. And once again, let's just try to prove this. If I don't add this middleware, these values will be equal to undefined. Okay, so let's test this out. Okay, so it says internal error. Let's see why this is the case. Because it says we cannot read these values, right? It says title from the request.body is undefined. This is the first thing that we have, so it cannot destructure that. So let's say Control Z, bring this back, save. Now it should be working out as expected. And when we create something, so we put the console log, which is this one. Let me scroll to the bottom. Okay, so it is this transaction that we have. I said that this will be an array. We would like to get the first value. So this is exactly the case. We have the array. The first object is the created transaction. Okay, so this was the income. Now we can create an expense. So let's say category could be something like expenses, or expense maybe. For the title, let's say groceries. User ID could be the same. Amount, let's say, will be 200. Sorry, if it is an expense, it's going to be negative, right? So just put minus at the beginning. Just send the request. Let's take a look at the database. I'd like to refresh this. Okay, so we got that as well. Same user, different amount, and it is expense. Okay, so that's it for this section where we can create a transaction. In the next section, maybe we can add the GET request where we can fetch a transaction by the user ID. So I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so this is where we left. Now I'd like to add a GET request where we can fetch the transactions by a user ID. Just before we do so, I will create one more transaction. So here I'll say user ID will be something else, right? And category could be expense. Let's say this will be minus 500. And let's say something like AirPods. Okay, I'll just say send. I just changed the user ID because I'll show you something in this section. Okay, now let's get started with the GET request. I'll say app.get, and maybe I'll just put it before the post request. Like absolutely not important, but this is what I'd like to do so that I have my GET request at the very top. Again, absolutely not really needed. Let's say API transactions. We will fetch the transactions by the user ID, right? So here I'll say whatever the user ID. We'll say colon. This will be dynamic. That's why we put colon, and then we can put user ID. Now, what does that mean? So we will say create a new request. That will be get, let's say localhost API transactions, but only fetch the transactions of this user, let's say, which has the ID of 45, right? So this value will be dynamic. It could be 1, 2, 3, or whatever the user ID is. So that's why we say, colon user ID. And again, we'll have the async function, get the request and response. And then right here, we'll have the try and catch block. So let me kill the left-hand side and handle the catch initially. I will copy this basically and paste this in. I'll say error getting the transactions, and then internal error. Now under the try, first we would like to get the user ID from the URL, right? So you can say request.params, and then you can destructure this value. So I'll say user ID. If you call this as something like, X or hello, that would be X as well, right? So whatever you have here, it should be the exact same thing. And let's try to console log it. I'll say user ID, save, and try to send a request. Now, it'll just pend, right? It is pending because we don't really send a response back. That's fine. Let's just scroll to the top. This is the URL. Sorry, this is the user ID that we got from the params. So if you put something different, let's say cancel, send it again, this is going to be that value. Okay, but now let's try to actually do something instead of console logging it. I would like to say await SQL and add the backticks. So I will say select everything, right? Every column from the transactions table where the user ID is matching with the URL, right? Whatever user sends. So I'll say user ID is equal to this value. And we can say order this. I'll say order by the created at field, right? Created at date. And we can say in the descending order. This is something optional. You don't have to put it, but I'll have it. And then let's say whatever you return, we can assign this into a variable called transactions that is going to be an array, as you can tell, type of array. And we can say res.status of 200, and then JSON is going to be whatever the transactions are, right? Okay, let's save and give it a go. So I'll put 123, or let's put an ID that doesn't exist in the database. So I'll say send. This should be an empty array, but we have two different transactions with this ID. So we're gonna get both of them, right? And we have one transaction with this user ID. So we're gonna get that. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Depending on the ID, you're gonna get the transactions. And if you don't have that kind of ID, so we don't have this ID in the database, so we'll get an empty array. So let's put the correct ID. Okay, so it is working as expected. Now I'd like to add one more route. So this section was really short. Let's try to add one more endpoint. I'll say app.delete, where we'd like to basically delete a transaction by the transaction ID, right? So I'll say it'll be /API/transactions. And to be able to check which transaction that we'd like to delete, we can get the ID. And again, we'll say request and response. Let's say it'll be async. And then here we'll have the try and catch block. Just like previously, I'll get the catch and then paste this in. Let's say error deleting the transaction. And then in the try, we can first get the ID. I'll say grab the ID from the URL, so from the params, and then we'll say await SQL. Here we'd like to delete something, so I'll say delete from the transactions table where the ID is matching with the ID we have in the URL, and we'd like to get all the fields, so I'll say returning asterisk, basically everything, so that we can assign this to a variable. So I'll say transaction, or I'll just say result, and here I'll say if result.length is equal to 0, that means we couldn't delete anything, we couldn't find it. So here I'll say return the res.status of 404, which means not found, and let's say JSON. This is going to be message of something like transaction not found. But in the else case, that means we could delete it successfully. So I'll say res.status of 200, which means success. I'll say JSON, and our message could be something like deleted successfully, right? I'll say transaction deleted successfully. So first, let's try to create an error. Here I'd like to delete that. I'll say add one more request, and we can close these, by the way. Let's say delete method to API transactions. Let's put an ID that doesn't really exist. I'll say send a request. Why did we got an error? Let's see. It is delete method to API transactions, it should be. So here error message basically said we cannot find it. That's why I thought, do we have a typo, right? That was my thought process. I just wanted to mention that. Now let's send a request. So here it says internal error. Do we have any typos or so invalid input syntax? Okay, so since ID should be a type of number, this is going to crash. Let's put a number that we don't really have, like 999. We don't have this in the database. So here it says transaction not found. But if we try to delete a transaction that we already have, such as ID of 2, which is the groceries, so let's try to delete that one. Okay, it has been deleted successfully. Let's double check. Okay, and of course we had the AirPods, so I forgot to refresh, but looks like it has been deleted. Let's try to delete this one as well, which is the ID of 3. And let's refresh. Okay, it's gone. That means it is working correctly. Now, what's up with this error when you have the string, right? When you don't have the number on the URL, our server crashes. Let's try to fix it. So what we can do is basically, first let's just say console log, and I'd like to walk you through it, like my thought process. So first I'll say type of ID and just put this in the terminal. So here I'll just send a request. Oops, let's open this up. Send a request. Type should be string, right? And if we put number, I think it should still be string, because whatever you put in the URL, it'll be string. So I'll put 5, maybe 55. Now it says transaction not found, but it doesn't fail, right? And by the way, if you have realized, even though we put like 55, type is still string. This is not the case, like this is not the problem. The problem is happening here. When you put the DSA, which is coming from the URL, this is going to crash. So what we would like to do before we call this query, we can just add an if check. So just before the result, I'll go ahead to delete the console log and I'll say if, let's say if it is not a number, right? So I'll say if ID is not a number, but this is string. So let's try to convert it to the number, right? To the integer. So I'll say parse int. So once it is not a number, we would like to say return res.status. And do I have a typo, by the way? Maybe we should have one more parentheses. Okay, so I'll say res.status of 400, and I'll say JSON. We could say something like invalid transaction ID, right? Or maybe not found. In this case, I'll just say invalid ID. Okay, let's try to give it a go. I'll put a string in the URL. Okay, it says invalid transaction ID. This time our server did not crash because we didn't really hit this query, right? So this did not crash the server. First we hit the if check where it is not a number. We got this message with the status. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's gonna be it for the delete method. In the next section, we're going to build one more endpoint, and then I think it should be good to go. So I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so this is where we left. So far we have built 3 different endpoints where we can get the transactions, create one and delete one. So these are the things that we'll be calling from the home page as well as the create page. So we can create an expense or income, we can fetch them, and we can delete them. But now we are missing one thing, that is to get the summary, right? So we would like to get the total balance, the income, as well as the expenses that we have. So let's try to build that endpoint. Here I'll go under the server.js file and I'll add a GET request at the very bottom. So I'll say app.get and it'll be /API/transactions. Let's say it'll be /summary and then the user ID, so that we know which user summary that we get, right? Here I'll say it'll be an async function. Get the request and response, and let me shrink the left hand side. Okay, so we're gonna call this controller function. Let's have the try and catch. I'd like to get our catch as always. Let's say error getting the summary, and then the internal error, so whatever that is. First, I'd like to get the user ID from the request.params, and then we'll get 3 different results. So as I said, the balance, the income, as well as the expenses. So first, let's get started with the balance. I'll say balance result, and we'll say await, call the SQL function with this query. Oops, let's say double backticks, and then within this I'll say select. Now we'll use something different called class. Let's say, I think this is how we type it. Alright, so here we'll put two different values. The first one will be the sum, the total of amount, and let's make this to be all uppercase. We're going to sum the amount, but now if this is undefined, we would like to get the 0 value, right? So just think about it. You just signed up, you don't have any transactions in the database. This is going to be equal to undefined, right? In this case, you would like to get the 0 as the fallback value. So this is exactly what we are doing. And then we'll say, call this as a balance. You can call this anything, like hello as well, but of course it should be something make sense, such as balance. We'll say select those from the transactions table where the user ID is equal to this value that we have. So if you think about it, this feels like an English sentence, right? So we have either the total amount. If it is undefined, we'll get the 0. Let's call this as balance and select everything from the transactions where the user ID is matching with this one. Okay, so this is the total balance. And then I'd like to do the same thing for the income. I'll say income result, and then let's say await SQL and call the function. Okay, so one thing I'd like to mention, now income is plus, right? It is positive, and expenses are negative. So we will say if amount is greater than 0, it means it is an income, and if it is an expense, amount is less than 0, right? So just keep this in mind because we'll be using it. Here I'll say select. Once again, I'll get the exact same thing. Because it could be undefined, we would like to get the 0 value in that case, and you can format this if you really wanted to. Then we'll say call this as income, and let's say from transactions, put the table name. You can go to the next line, and then we'll say where the user ID is equal to this value. Again, I'm too lazy to type this out, so I'll go ahead, copy and paste. But one more thing, we'll say and the amount is greater than 0. Okay, that means this is our income result. I'd like to duplicate this. I think I'll just give a space and I'll say expenses. Okay, so I'll say amount 0. Let's call this as expenses from the transactions. Everything will be the same, but amount will be less than 0. If this is the case, these are going to be our expenses. And now we can basically say res.status of 200 and then put the JSON. Here I'll put 3 different values. The balance, let's say it'll be balance result. This is going to be an array. Let's get the first value and then balance. So here if you said balance 1, 2, 3, here you need to say 1, 2, 3 as well. Okay, so this is whatever you put right here in all these fields. Let's duplicate this. This is going to be income, and we'll say income result dot income. Duplicate that. This is going to be expense, or even expenses. This is how I called it. Let's say expenses result, and then here we could say expenses. Okay, let's save and give it a go. We have, let's take a look at the database. I think we only have one transaction, so let's try to create another one. I'll go find the post method, get the body. So these are all the fields. I would like to add something like, I don't know, let's say freelance work. It is also an income. Let's say it is 1000. So for the same user, and let's add an expense. Here I'd like to call this as, I don't know, let's say minus 1500, let's say rent. Okay, send the request. Now we would like to get the summary. Here I will create one more request. API transactions, it was summary and then the user ID, so that it'll be 1, 2, 3. Send the request. Okay, so this is the total balance, the income and the expenses, right? So in total we have 3,000 income. Let's double check. So 2,000, 1,000, it is 3 in total, and then minus 1,500, which makes our balance to be 1,500 as well. So again, how that works is completely depending on the amount field. So if it is greater than 0, it's going to get it as an income, and if it is less than 0, it'll get it as an expense. And then depending on that, we will get this output. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now that's gonna be it for the section where we build the transaction summary endpoint depending on the user ID. And these are all the endpoints that we're gonna have. We are not gonna add anything else, but there is one concept that I'd like to talk about, which is called rate limiting. It is something that you should definitely know as a beginner. I think it'll just make a huge difference, and I'd like to talk about it in the next section. So I'll see you there. So we're going to talk about something called rate limiting, but before we do so, let's try to see the problem that we have in the first place. So why do we need rate limiting? So imagine this, you have a really toxic user, right? So all he wants to do is just break your application. They visit homepage and non-stop they refresh this page. So they are sending constantly requests, right? Or they go into the create page, constantly they are just creating something. So it is as if they are like spamming non-stop, right? At some point, your server might crash. And imagine a bunch of different users doing this. So your server is definitely will be overloaded, right? It'll be overwhelmed. And this is where rate limiting comes into play. Let's read it out loud and we'll see the example. So rate limiting is a way to control how often someone can do something on a website or on the application, like how many times they can refresh a page, make a request to an API, or try to log in. And like we can put some limits, like only 100 requests per user every 15 minutes, right? So they can send only 100 requests per user and every 15 minutes. If you wanted to, you can increment it, decrement it, depending on your use case. And here is how it'll work. Just before our API, right, in front of it, we will put the rate limiter so that we can basically control the amount of requests that we process. So here, let's say we're going to get first 100 requests. So they all will be responded successfully. But then for the 101, right, 100 first request is going to be canceled. We'll say something like, you sent too many requests, please try again later. And the status code for this is 429, which means too many requests. And here also I have some notes where the rate limiting helps with preventing the abuse and, protecting your servers from getting overwhelmed, right? Overloaded. Okay, so this is basically what rate limiting is. And can you tell where can we implement it? So just in front of your API, right? Just before you send a response back, which is going to be as a middleware, right? So we are going to get their request. We will check if they should be rate limited or not. So this is a perfect use case for a middleware as well, right? So we'll put the middleware as our rate limiter, and then we will send a response back depending on the status, right? Either success or it'll be failed. And we can implement this by using a Redis database as well as a rate limiting package, and these are going to be provided by Upstash. So you can find the link in the description. Again, they have a free plan that we can use. I'll go ahead and visit. So here we can see there are a bunch of different products. We'll be using the Redis with the rate limiting. So I already have an account. I'll just go ahead and log in. And I'd like to create a Redis database. Let's give it a name like wallet, or let's say React Native wallet. The region, I'll select the one that is closest to me. You can choose any of these, and I'll leave everything as it is. I am on the free plan just like you. I didn't pay anything. Let's say next, create it, and we'll get some environment variables. Let's scroll down a little bit. It's going to be the Upstash Redis. Let me zoom in. So it'll be Upstash Redis REST URL. Let's copy it. Visit the .env file, paste this in, and then we'll get the actual value So copy this, paste this in, and then do the same thing for the REST token. Let's say equal to this value. Now we'll be using them, and maybe we can optimize our code base a bit. We will absolutely optimize this entire file. So we will actually extract these functions to these routes to different folders, maybe in the next section. Okay, so I'll just dedicate an entire section for the code organization. But for now, let's say create the middleware folder, and we will add the rate limiter.js file. So this is the middleware will go in, and then config. Here, let's try to configure the upstash. So I'll say upstash.js. So here we'll just create an instance, and it'll be looking like this. So it'll be coming from the database actually. I'd like to copy this and paste this in. So here, instead of putting the URL and token as these values, we can grab them from the .env file. So I will actually delete those, and I'll say the Redis instance will be created depending on our .env file. So I'll say redis.fromEnv, call the method, and then we can put the limiter itself. So I'll say call the rate limit, and I think we haven't installed this package as well as the rate limit. So let's type this out and we'll install it. I'll say import the rate limit from, let's say, at upstash. So upstash/rate limit. Go ahead, save this file, and we can delete those because we don't really want to, like, this is for testing purposes they have in the documentation. Like, we can give it a go, but for now, let's try to install these packages. I'll kill the backend, clear the terminal, and in Windows, you can say CLS to clear the terminal. In Mac, it is either clear or Command K. Okay, so that was something that I wanted to mention. Now let's say npm install at upstash/redis, and let's do the same thing for the rate limit. Also, I would like to put some specific versions. So I'll say 1.34.9, and then for the rate limit. So for the rate limit, first let me kill the left hand side so that we can see it clearly. It'll be 2.0.5. Okay, just go ahead and install them. So it's been installed. Now we can kill the actually, let's start it, not kill. Let's say npm run dev. It is started. We can delete those. We don't really need it. This is just for testing purposes, just to check if it is working or not. But instead of doing this, we would like to configure the rate limit. So here we can use the sliding window. So this is a algorithm that we can use, and then we'll say something like 100 requests per minute, right? We can say 60 seconds. This is how many requests that we can handle. And you could definitely update these if you really wanted to. So you can go a little bit more extreme, like only one request per 10 seconds. But in this case, your application would be unusable, right? You can go with like 100 per 30 seconds, 60 seconds, however you want it to, right? So you can even check a quick research, what are the best values. All right, so I think we have some typos in our code. This should be rate limit, all lowercase after the R. I'll go ahead, update this one as well. So I think that's why we couldn't get the auto completions, right? Now we can get that. And then this is not going to be Redis. So let's say it'll be new rate limit instance, just like this, rate limit, and let's say rate limiter. And I'd like to basically delete those. I'll say export default this rate limiter instance. We'll be using it in a second. Now to be able to get the environment variables, we need to import the .env as well. Let's call the config module. So that's the entire configuration. I just went pretty slowly, but in total, it's only 8 lines of code. That's all you need. With the spaces, it is 11 lines of code. Okay, so that's it for the upstash configuration. We'll be using this rate limiter to check if user can successfully send a request or should they be rate limited? And this is where this file comes into play. I'll say import the rate limiter that we have, and just make sure to put the extension at the end. Since we are using type of module, right, you have to put the extension at the end for the local imports. Okay, so I'll create a function, let's say const rate limit or rate limiter, however you'd like to call it. Maybe we can call this as rate limit. So this will be the instance for rate limit. The name is not really important, but I think this looks a little bit more cleaner, so that we can have the rate limiter as our middleware, right? So I'll say this is the async function where we would like to get the request, response, as well as the next function. Since this is a middleware, once we are done with it, we'll call the next function. So here I'll say maybe first try and catch. In the catch, we can just say console log rate limit error and put the error. And then we can call the next function with the error itself. Now in the try, we can get the success case. So we'll just check if it is success or not. We can say await rate limit dot limit, and you would like to put an identifier. So this could be something like user ID, or it could be IP address. Depending on this value, user will be identified and they would be rate limited. Now in our case, we don't really have the authentication on the backend side. So for now, I'll just put something like my rate limit. But as I said, in production grade applications, you would like to have something like, let's say either user ID, you could have IP address, so on and so forth. In our case, let's just keep it simple just to understand this concept, and just leave the a hard-coded key, a hard-coded identifier. And then we'll say if it is not success, right? We can say return res.status. And you already know it is 429, which means too many requests. We'll say send this message. Please try again later. And then we can, in the else case, if it is success, we can call the next function successfully. But if it is not success, we'll just return a status code with the error message. And then at the very end, we can say export this as a default, let's say rate limiter. So this is the middleware. We would like to put it in front of our API, right? This is our API just in front of it, where we have the middlewares. We can basically say app.use rate limiter. Okay, now let's actually try to test this out. I'd like to be a little bit more extreme. So I'll say only 4 requests per minute, and I'll send my requests. So 1, it is successfully done. Let's say 2, 3, 4. Now the 5th one should fail. Too many requests, please try again later. So basically we cannot send any more requests. And if you take a look at the database, you will be able to see that we are rate limited. So we have sent 4 requests. Now we are rate limited, and this was our key. Now this will block the entire application, right? All the users. But as I said, you would like to make it per user. And to be able to make that, you would either add the user ID or something like IP address. In this case, I'd like to keep it simple. My goal with this section is to teach you the rate limiting. So for that reason, I'll keep it simple. So here, I'll just put a comment. Here we just kept it simple. So in a real world application, you would like to put the user ID or the IP address as your key. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's gonna be it for this section as well. Let's try to fix this. I'll put 100 per 60 seconds. In the next section, we can basically organize our files and folders, and then we can get into the mobile application. So I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so let's try to organize the server.js file. Currently, it looks like a complete mess because we have everything right here in this file. Now what you'd like to do, basically take every one of these routes and put it under a folder. So I will create the routes folder, and let's try to see how we can get started with it. So everything is related to transactions, right? Here we can see we have API transactions for the summary, to delete, create, get. Everything is related to transactions. So we will create a route for that. I'll say transactions route.js file, and then we can create a router. So just follow along with me, it'll make sense in a second. Let's say import the express from express, and we would like to create a router, and I'll say express.router, and just make sure that this R is capitalized. And then I'll say export default this router. Here we'll put all of our routes. So just save, go ahead, get everything that you have seen here, right? Just cut that, paste this right here, and instead of app, we don't really have app, right? We have router. So we'll say router.get, we'll say router.post, router.delete, and one more get. Now let's try to import the SQL. We'll say .js at the end. Okay, now to be able to use the transactions, to be able to use this file, we need to import it. So if you have realized, every one of these routes has the /API/transactions, right? So this is something common that we have on all of our routes. So we can put it right here. I'll say app.use. This is a middleware that will add, let's say /API/transactions. If we got a request to this endpoint, we basically want to import this route. So let's say maybe import it and put it right here. I'll say import transactions route from this file. So we'll go into the routes and get this one. Just make sure to put the .js at the end. And we'll just put it right here. Now, since we have /API/transactions, we can delete them from here. So if it is only /API/transactions, we can just put slash, right? And here, this field already added. So this has been prefixed. We can delete that. Do the same thing for this one. And I think for the very first one. So let me just put them side by side and try to explain what we have done. I'll just zoom out a little bit. Okay, so we have added this /API/transactions, which is going to be prefixed with every single one of these routes. So we are basically saying that if we get a request to /API/transactions, go ahead and run this file where we have the get request, post, delete, and then this one. So if we get a request to /API/transactions/summary and then a user ID, just go ahead, run this function. And same for these ones. Okay, so let's open up the terminal. Looks like nothing has crashed, right? It is working as expected. And we can give it a go. Like I'll send the request, we should get a response back as exactly as it was before. So that's the very first thing that we have done, right? This is the first optimization that we can add. Now, one more thing I'd like to mention. Let's say later at some point you add some products to this application. So you would say create a route under the API, under the products, and you would create a route for that as well. So products route, and you could put every single route that is about products. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This makes it really, really convenient because let's say 1 month later, you come back to this code base, you would like to update something that is related to products. You don't need to visit this file at all, right? You don't have anything to do with it. You'll just visit the product routes and update that file and you're done. But of course, we don't have any products. One more thing. Now, this file could get really messy because we have a bunch of different functions. They could be 50 lines of code, 100 lines of code, so on and so forth. What you can do is take these functions and put them under a specific folder as well. So this is what we call a controller. So I'll go ahead, create the folder called controllers. So these are some best practices that you can keep in mind. And I'll say transactions controller.js file. Okay, so this is what we call the get transactions by user ID, right? So I will cut this and create a function. Let's say it'll be an async function where we can say get transactions by user ID. You can call this anything, but this is the name that I'll be going with. And then I'll paste this in. Let's try to delete this part completely and this one. Okay, so this should be good to go. Now we can add this function right here. Let's say get transactions by user ID. Let's try to import it. So we need to go one up under the controllers. Oops, let's say controllers and get this file. Okay, now let's do the same thing. And do we have a typo? Get transactions by user ID. So since this is not highlighted, I thought it is not working. Let's open up the terminal. Okay, it looks like, okay, so I think we forgot to say export this, right? So I'll say export. Now we can get that. Now it's been highlighted. Okay, the other thing is to create one. So I will basically cut this entire function. You can make it as an arrow function as well, but I'll just be consistent. I'll say async function, paste this in. The name could be, let's say, create transaction. And this is not an arrow function, so we can delete this and try to import it. Okay, now let's get the delete one. So I'll cut that. Let's say delete transaction. Export async function. It's kind of boring. You can skip this section. I mean, just pretty quickly speed up. Here I'll say delete transaction. And I think we should be good to go. And then the very last one is to get the summary, right? I'll cut that. Oops. And I'll just paste this in. Let's try to fix it. Okay, so let's save and try to see the terminal if we have any errors or not. In this file, I think we are using SQL, but we haven't really imported. Let's try to import that and put the .js at the end. Delete this. Okay, so everything should be working out. Let's take a look at the terminal and try to give it a go. Looks like we don't have any errors. Let's send a post request to create something like an income of, let's say, second salary. Let's say 4,000. We can create it successfully. Now let's try to get a transaction. Get the transactions for a profile. Looks like it failed. Let's see. Res is not defined. What do you mean? We sent a request to API transactions. Okay, so here we need to put the request and response. And again, my thought process was we sent a request. Let me just find it. It is the get request to this endpoint. Let me find the controller. We don't really have the response. So let's paste this in. Send the request. Now we can get the response back. And we can try to delete one. So I'll go ahead, delete the one with the ID of 4. So I'll put ID 4. It's been deleted. Let's put something that we don't really have in the database and put something that is invalid. Okay, so everything is working as expected. We can add something, get them, and let's get the summary as well. Okay, so it is working completely fine. And we have just organized our entire code base, right? We have our controller functions for the transactions. We have our middleware folder. We have the config, we have the routes, and server.js file looks a lot more cleaner, right? And we can, I think, delete this one as well. Now, one of the conventions is to have a route for the health check. So you would basically say, I don't know, maybe API/health, or just health check, or just health, something similar. And then you would send a response back. You would send your request just to check if your API is up and running. But in this case, I'll just delete it to keep it simple. And I think we can take this function and put it right here under the database. So here I'll paste this in, and let's say export this function, and we can call it right here by importing it. We can delete the SQL, we are not using it. It is coming right here, right? Open up the terminal. Let's see, it is working as expected. If we try to break this, so I'll try to break that. Let's change the password and save this file. Now authentication failed, but if we put the correct one, everything is working as expected. Alright, so with that, I think that's gonna be it for the entire backend part, where we have built the entire API. We even implemented something called rate limiting. I hope you enjoyed the entire section. In the next one, we're gonna get started with the React Native mobile application. So I'll see you there. So I already said goodbye, but just a second, I'd like to do one more quick optimization, where I'd like to take everything that is related to application and put it under a folder called source. So if you have ever used React, Next.js, or any other production grade framework, probably you have seen this folder, right? The entire application logic is within this folder. So this is what I'd like to do. I'll just get the config, controllers, middleware, routes, but not the node modules. So let me first grab all of these and put it under the source. I'll do the same thing for the routes. And finally, the server.js file. So these are the actual application logic, but things like, package.json or .env file, or, our dependencies could be outside of this folder. So this is just a convention that I wanted to follow. But if you open up the terminal, you'll see that it's going to crash. It's because here we said, just go ahead and run the server.js file, but now it is not really right here, right? It is under the source. So we'll say, now it is under the source folder. Save this and kill this and restart it. Now it is working correctly. And I'll add one more script. So this is something for the production. Here I'll just say run the server.js file, but with the node, right? In development, we would like to run it with nodemon, but in the production, we'll just run it with node, which is something that is not going to listen for the changes. Okay, so this is something that we'll be using when we deploy this API. Okay, I think that's gonna be it. Under the main, this is one more optimization that we could add. I just feel like this section is never going to end, but here we go. The starter file is not index.js. In our case, it is server.js, right? And it is under the source folder. So let's go ahead, add this, and now everything should be working correctly. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this section. I'll see you in the next one. Alright, so finally we can get started with the mobile folder where we can initialize our React Native application. Currently we don't really have anything. And before we write any code, I'd like to, just give you a quick crash course on React Native. So these are the things that I have explained in my previous tutorials, but just in case if you are new here, I'd like to go over it pretty quickly. Okay, so you might be asking, what is React Native in the first place? It is a framework that allows you to build mobile applications using React. So that's it. It is just a framework that allows you to build mobile applications using React. You can use either JavaScript or TypeScript. And there is a really common term called cross-platform development, which means writing code once that can run on multiple platforms. And this is exactly what React Native allows you to do, because it is a cross-platform framework. It's a cross-platform framework because you can write one code base in JavaScript and you can deploy it to both iOS and Android. So this is exactly what we'll be doing. We'll just write one code base in JavaScript and it'll work both on iOS and Android. And it can even work in web thanks to Expo, which is something that we'll get into. But this wasn't really the case back in the old days. So if you want to build a mobile application, you had to build it twice. So one for the App Store and then one for the Play Store. And assuming you don't really know any of these languages, it would be really slow because you first had to learn Swift, build it. Once it is done, just go back and learn Kotlin, and build it, deploy it, so on and so forth. It was really expensive as a founder as well because you had to hire two different engineering teams, right? One team would build this part of the app, and then the other one this app. So it's like really cumbersome and expensive. And before Swift, I think there was Objective-C. Like Swift is a little bit more simplified version of it. I have never used any of them, but these are the things that I have just researched, and just keep that in mind. And then before Kotlin, you had to build it with Java. You can still do it, but I think Kotlin is a little bit more abstract, like abstraction on top of it. So I think developers mostly, let's say, they prefer this over Java. And then if you wanted to build it with, if you wanted to build it for the App Store, you have to have a MacBook, which is, to be honest, pretty expensive. But now, thanks to React Native, you can just skip everything and just learn JavaScript and build it, which is pretty cool. And there is something called Expo on top of it, which is something that React Native team recommends. So this is a screenshot from their documentation that you can take a look as well. So just check out the reactnative.dev. This is the entire documentation for React Native. So they basically say that they believe the best way to experience React Native is through a framework, and their optional choice is Expo, which is something that we'll be using. It's incredible. We'll just see it in this tutorial. Okay, so our go-to framework for React Native is Expo. But now don't get confused. React Native is not the same thing as Expo. So Expo is built on top of React Native, okay? So it is like additional toolbox that we have that makes React Native development a lot more easier. And we'll see that, as I said. So it's like Next.js that is built on top of React in web development, right? So you get additional optimizations like, let's say, server-side rendering, server actions, SEO optimizations, image optimizations, links, so on and so forth, right? We could just talk about it for hours, but let's move on. So here I just put 5 different comparisons that you can take a look. Like, I think there's nothing to explain. Just pause the video and take a look at it, even though I'll go over it. So this is the web React, okay? So this is just React.js and this is React Native. So the component structure is exactly the same, but instead of having divs and h1 and p, we have like view and text. So it doesn't really matter if you use h1, p, span, let's say h6, h3, any kind of text, it should go under the text component, which is coming from React Native. And div is just a view, okay? So we just have view for boxes. Okay, so we'll just get into it a lot more in the coding, like in a couple of minutes, but these are some examples to keep in mind. And when it comes to styling, here in web, we would have a class name and then define it in our CSS file, right? So we have like card class with some padding, border radius, etc. And then we put it right here. But instead in React Native, we create a style sheet, okay? So just import it, create a styles object where you have your classes. So card is basically an object. You would give the padding, all the styles, and then just come back to here and say styles.card, which is going to apply these styles to this view. So same for this one, so on and so forth. Let's see, what do we have else? The event handling. Okay, so we don't really have a button in React Native. We have things like touchable opacity or pressable, which are the equivalent of a button, right? And on web, we have like on click, on mouse over, but since in mobile development, we don't really have a mouse, there are events like on press, on long press, so on and so forth. Okay, so we have lists. So in React, you would do something like array.map, and for each item you would render something. This is something that you can do in React Native as well, but the better option is to use something called flat list. It has a lot more optimization on top of this usage. Okay, so this is something that we'll be using as well. Just keep that in mind. You would say, here is my item, sorry, here's my array, and for each item, go over and run this function. So it'll basically take every single item and return this part. Okay, so this might look a little bit weird, but we'll see that in the tutorial in the incoming sections. And then finally, we have the forms. So instead of a input, right, instead of an input, we have text input component, which is almost the exact same thing with some syntax differences. And we don't really have a form element. So in web, we have onSubmit, but here basically when we click to the button, we would just submit that. Okay, so these are just some examples that I wanted to put here so that you can just get a little bit motivated that React is not really different than React Native or vice versa. There are just some syntax differences and a couple of different, let's say, concepts, right? Okay, now how are you going to follow along with this tutorial? Let's try to go over it pretty quickly. So basically you have two different options. You can either install Expo Go on your phone, right? So this is a screenshot that I took. So you could install it from either App Store or Play Store and then scan a QR code. This is something that we'll see in a second. Or you could install a simulator on your machine. So if you're using Windows, you can install Android Studio. And if you're on Mac, you can use Xcode. Like this will take a little bit longer because you're installing a huge simulator. But if you want to get started pretty quickly, you can install the Expo Go application. It'll just be installed in like a couple of minutes. And here, as I said, this is really quick and convenient to get started with, but this is a lot more slower. And this could be pretty cool if you are going to build more applications in the future, right? In the long run, it could be fun because you would just have your simulator in your laptop, so you don't really need to check your phone every single time. So in either case, you are going to build the application. So I think I would recommend you to go with this option to be a little bit fast, but it's completely up to you. In this video, I'll be using the simulator so that I can just show you the output as we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the actual application. I'll open up the terminal. Now I just killed the backend. For now, we don't really need it. So I'll cd into the mobile folder and I'll say npx create -expo -app add latest, and we're going to put dot at the end. So we'll be using Expo for the initialization. Like as I said, it is the, let's just go through it pretty quickly. I think I haven't really talked about it Expo enough. So it is the framework that is built on top of React Native, and it's like all the toolbox, all the necessary APIs that would let you to build a production-ready application. And you can take a look at the entire documentation. They actually have a pretty cool tutorial right here within the documentation, but in this video, I'd like to walk you through it. Okay, so we'll just run this command to initialize the Expo app. So this is going to get you a boilerplate Expo application, and we're going to go ahead, delete everything, and just get started from scratch. Okay, so it's done. Now, this is pretty much a React code base. So we have things like components, we have custom hooks, we have some constants. So these are the colors, but we're going to change it and build it from scratch. So it should be pretty, let's say, pretty familiar to you. But we'll delete everything and get started from scratch. But first, I'd like to just run this app on my simulator. Okay, so I'll just put them side by side. Now let's say clear the terminal and npx expo. Now in a second, I'll show you how to run this on your physical device. But first, now if you're on iOS or if you're on Mac, just press I. But if you're on Windows, press A. So I'll press I. It's going to get started with it. Okay, so this is the boilerplate application that Expo gives you. We'll delete everything and get started from scratch. But first, let me open up the camera and show you how to open this up on your phone. So I have both an Android device and an iOS device. So first, let's just from here say scan the QR code. I'll click to it, and here we should be able to have a QR code that I'd like to scan pretty quickly. Okay, now it is building the application. We're gonna get the exact same output that we have right here. Okay, let's do the exact same thing on my iOS device, just to double check it is working correctly. Okay, so if you don't have the iOS simulator, you can follow along with your actual phone. Okay, now let's try to update something. So here I'll go ahead, update this welcome text, which is under the app, tabs, and index. So we'll delete everything and explain everything. Do not worry at the moment. Here I'll say welcome 1, 2, 3, let's say. And once I save, notice how it'll be updated. Okay, so that means everything is working correctly. I'll delete these applications, right? I'll just kill them, and instead I would like to explain it from the simulator so that we can see it side by side. Okay, so now that you know how you can follow along with your phone, let me maximize this and just zoom out a little bit. So there is so much going on at the moment. What we would like to do, just delete everything and get started from scratch. And thankfully, React Native, the Expo team gives you a script where you can reset the project. So these are the things that we don't really understand at the moment. So that's why I'll go ahead, kill the application with Control-C, and then I'll say npm run reset-project. So this will basically reset the project. And here it asks me a question where it says, do you want me to delete everything, or should I take everything and put it a folder called app-example? So I'll just say press enter. So it'll take everything that we had and it'll put it under the app-example folder, right? So we had the components, constants, hooks, but for now I'd like to ignore this and take a look at the index.tsx file with a super basic content. So I'll just run the app once again. So let's say npx expo, and I'll say just press I. Let's put them side by side and go over it. Now this is the old version. I'll press R to reload it. Here we can see it says reload the app. Now this is the output. Now I'd like to go a little bit slowly at the beginning, right? So I'll just go really slowly just to make sure we understand the fundamentals, and then we can speed up the process. Okay, so everything starts from the app folder, and specifically from the layout file. So this is a special file called _layout. It's using TypeScript, but in this tutorial we'll be using JavaScript just to keep it beginner friendly. So here they have something called Stack Navigator. I'll explain this, but for now, let's go into the homepage, which is called index.tsx. Again, a special file name. Okay, so this is the homepage, the home screen that you would have. Now let's try to change something. Save, it's been updated. Okay, now let's get started with some components. So we said that view is equivalent of dev, right? It is just a simple box. And then we have some styles. So here, let's say the background color is going to be something like red. It'll be updated. So this is how you would add some styles. There are different ways that we'll see. You could either put it like inline. Let's do it actually on this one. So you would say style, open up this object, and you would say color, let's say, I'll say it'll be blue. Okay, it's been updated. I don't really know if you can see it, but it's definitely blue. And then let's try to put a component like a link. Let's say it'll take us to the about screen, which is something that we don't have, but we'll create it. Now for the link, you have either Expo router, right? Link coming from Expo router or React navigation. I would recommend you to use Expo. It is a lot better than the other one. So let's say href. Once we click to it, it'll take us to the about page, but we don't really have this one. So let's try to create it. I'll say about.jsx. Now I'll use a snippet called RNFE, which is going to give you a React Native functional component. Let's say this will be called as about. Now, if you cannot get this snippet, you can install this extension. Just go ahead and install this one, and you can say things like RNFE, and you can get the exact same output that I have. Okay, let's save and try to save this file as well. Now it says we cannot see it, but it's actually there. I'll refresh this. I'll say R to reload this. Now I'll click to it. We can go into that page. So if you're getting this error, probably VS Code is buggy. Just press Command Shift P or Control Shift P and say developer reload window. So this is a pro tip that you can keep in mind, but looks like this does not work. Let's try to make everything JSX. Let's say yes, and I'll update this one as well. Let's go with JavaScript. Save this file and close that as well. Okay, now we don't really have any errors. But now, as you can tell, the navigation is working. Now, if you can see, this is what we call the stack navigator. So when you click to it, new pages will be coming from the right-hand side. And the previous pages will go from the left-hand side, right? So this feels like a stack. And this is possible thanks to this component that we just put into the root layout. So almost always you would like to have this component in your applications unless you are building only a single page mobile app. Okay, so we're gonna have that right here. And now you might be asking, I don't really want to see this screen header, right? So it's really basic, really simple to get rid of. We'll go under this tag, we'll say screen options, where we'll like to say the header shown is going to be equal to false. Save, now it is gone. Okay, so this is something that you can keep in mind in your notes. But in this case, I'd like to have it. But in this case, it is something that I'd like to have it, so I'll just delete that. Now let's see another component. So here I'll just say the image component. Again, use the one that is coming from Expo image. It's a lot more optimized. Here we can put the source. Now this could be either a local image or a remote image. So let's see what I mean. I'll just put the URI. And let's grab an image from Unsplash. Okay, so I'll just get this keyboard image. Let's say copy the image address or link address. What should we do? I'll just say copy the link address. I'll paste this in. Let's put them side by side. Now, if I save, I cannot see anything because we don't really have any width or height. So let's say style. Let's put the width. I'll say 100. And let's do the same thing for height. Okay, so for some reason we cannot still see that. I think we should get the image address. So here I'll say copy the image address instead of link. Okay, now we can see it. So you would use URI if you want to get a remote image, but let's say you want to get this local image from the images. Let's say you would like to get the React logo.png. So here, instead of this, I'll comment this out for the reference. Let's say you would create the image component once again. Now for the source, you would like to import it. So here I'll say require. I'll put at, which means you're in the root. Okay, so you're in the mobile folder. From here, we'll go under the assets. Let's say /assets. Go under the images and then get the React logo.png. And of course, I'd like to get my styles. So let's paste this in. Okay, so we can import that as well. It is working correctly. So these are the things that you can keep in mind. I think we'll be using them later in the video. So I know that we are going slowly, but I really want to make sure that you understand the basics. So let's give another example. I'll create a view. Basically, it is a div. If you put some text like hello, what do you think will happen? Well, I think we'll get an error. Let's save. As we can tell, whenever you have a text, it has to be under the text component. So here I'll just put text. And now let's say hello. Save. The error is gone. Now you might be asking, hey, we had a text here under the link, but it is not wrapped with a text component. Well, if you hover over the link, they will tell you that we are wrapping it under a text component by default so that you don't have to. Okay, so even though it looks like we don't have it, like we definitely have that under the hood. So this is one more thing that you can keep in mind. Otherwise, you'll get errors just like this one. Okay, so let's delete this view. And other thing that I'd like to talk about is the styles. Here, I'll go ahead, create a, let's say we'll create an object. I'll say post styles. This is the convention. Most of the time, this is what we call it. We'll say from the style sheet. So just import that from React Native. Let's do it, style sheet. Here we would like to create one. Not compose, let's say create. And we'll pass an object. So here, let's say I want to call this as the container class, right? So I can say container and put these styles in, which is flags of 1. And let me copy and paste the rest. Okay, now instead of putting it inline, I'll say delete this and grab it from the styles. So I'll say styles.container. Okay, now let's say everything is going to be the same. Here you can add more things like background color is going to be, let's say purple. It's going to be updated. That means these styles are actually being updated, right? They are being applied. So you can do the same thing for the rest. Just cut this out from here. I'll say styles dot, let's say, I don't know, let's say heading. You would go ahead, create this one. Let's say font size is going to be something like huge, right? And let's say color is going to be blue as well. Okay, as you can tell, these are the things that you would do. This is a different way of using it. Now this is really cool actually, because if you think about it, you will have like 20 lines of code for a single class, right? For a single style. And if you put it right here inline, so let's pretty quickly do it. Imagine you have this one, like at some point this component will be really, really ugly, because here you will have another 20 lines of code, right? Here you would have maybe 50 lines of code, so everything would be styles. Instead of doing it in this way, we would create our own object, and we can even take it, put it into a different file, so that we don't really have to see any styles in the JSX file. So I just did some Control-Z and bring this back to the previous state. Now, I think we can leave this section here. Let's talk about the app.json file as well. This is the configuration file for your mobile app. Here we can see like we have the entire Expo configuration. You have your icon for Android, for web. These are the things that you would have. And then let's say for the iOS, for plugins, like everything, right? This is the configuration file. Most of the time we don't really work with it, but once you're about to deploy this app to Apple Store or Play Store, I think this is the file that you would be updating. Now one more thing, if you press W, it's going to open up this application on web. Okay, so you can just put it into the web view, right? So you just shrink the screen and you can test this out, or you can build a web application with Expo. But we are not really interested with this option, so we'll move on with the mobile phone that we have, right? So I'll leave this section here. We just learned the basics of React Native, right? In the incoming sections, we can get started with the authentication, so on and so forth. Maybe just one more thing I could explain pretty quickly. Now there is something called Tab Navigator. So this is an example that I have. So if you can see at the very bottom of this file, or at the bottom of this phone, right, here we have a couple of different tabs. Whenever you click to one of them, the UI will update. So this is what we call the Tab Navigator, right? So it is a navigation pattern that creates a tab bar, usually at the bottom of the screen, that allows users to switch between different screens. In this application, we are not going to have the tab navigation. As you can tell, we don't really have this tab at the bottom. Instead, we have the stack navigator. But just to mention, if you wanted to create a tab navigator under the app folder, you would create this special folder called tabs, and then you would put your tabs within this folder. This is something that we have done in the previous React Native tutorials. You can check them out, but in this video, we'll not be using it. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. With that, that's gonna be it for this section. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, so this is where we left. We just learned the basics of React Native, but now it's time to set up our code base. So to keep everything simple and a lot more easier for the incoming sections, we can add our CSS files, our colors, some images, so on, right? So here I have prepared an entire GitHub gist. So I'll just put the link in the description. You can find it. So here we'll have a couple of different CSS files that we would like to copy and paste instead of typing them out. Because this is not a CSS course, we would like to focus on the actual React Native concepts, right? So here we have things like flags, background colors, paddings, width, height, super basic CSS. So in this case, I'd like to just copy and paste those. Here I'll copy the very first file, which is for the Auth. So here I'll go ahead, paste this in under the, let's say, mobile, create the styles folder under the assets, and then create this file called auth.styles.js. So I'll go ahead, paste this in, 100 lines of code. We'll be using them. So these are basically the class names that you would need to get a beautiful output like these ones. So this is the, styles for the auth pages, and then we have the home page as well as the create page. And then we're gonna need some colors so that I can give you all these different themes. So we have the coffee theme, we have the purple theme, the green, and then the blue ocean theme, right? So for this, once again, you can find the colors.js file, go ahead, copy it. Again, I'll explain how this works. Just put it under the constants. So here under the mobile, create the constants, and then let's say colors.js file, paste this in. So basically we have, let's say, 4 different themes, right? They have the exact same thing, like primary, background, so on and so forth, but the values are different. And then at the very bottom, we have this themes object. If it is coffee, it'll use the coffee theme. If it is forest, we'll use the forest theme, so on and so forth. And then here, this is the actual colors. Let's say you would like to use the coffee theme. Here you would just say, give me the coffee. If you would like to use the ocean theme, you would put this and your application will change the theme. And we'll see this. By default, I'd like to go with the coffee theme, okay? So just save that, and under the auth styles, here we can see for the colors, we are just grabbing them from the colors object. Okay, so this is a pretty basic JavaScript trick that we almost always do when it comes to themes. And then I'll create the home.styles.js file, and then let's create the create.styles.js file as well. Let's try to copy and paste them. So this is the create page, pretty long, but that's fine. Paste this in, and that's it. Now we'll get the exact same thing. So this is another thing we'll get into a little bit later in the video, but for now, just get the home styles. Okay, so super basic CSS. Again, please don't get mad. This is super basic CSS, and I just assume you already know this. So we have things like width, height, flags direction, colors. Nothing to explain, otherwise this tutorial would be 20 hours and we don't really want to have something like that. Finally, I'll create one more thing under the, let me see, I think under the library. So I'll create the lib and I'll say utils.js file. Here we'll just have a utility function, a helper function that will basically format the date. So I'll copy that, paste this in. This is something that we'll use later in the video. Basically, we're going to get the date from our database, which is in this format, and we would like to convert it to be in this format, right? So let me pretty quickly display. This is what we have in the database. This is the format. And then this is what actually we want to see, the formatted version of it. Okay, so it'll be possible thanks to this function. And then very last thing will be the images. So I have generated these images with the help of AI with ChatGPT. So I paid $20 per month just to create this image for you guys, as well as this icon. So let's try to actually get those. So I'll provide them for free. Let me just find the GitHub repo for that. I think it is this one. You can find the link in the description. Currently it is private, but while you're watching, it'll be free. And I have even added some different variations, so you can use any of them that you wish. So this is something that I'll not be using, but I just created that in case you want to use it. So we have all of these. And I think we are missing this icon, this logo. Let me upload it as well. Alright, so I just uploaded that one as well. Just go ahead and install them, and we'd like to put them under the assets folder. So here under the images, I'll just go ahead and put them. Okay, so I just pasted all of these. I got the logo and then 4 different illustrations that I called I1, I2, all the way up to 4. Okay, so I think that's gonna be it for this quick setup section, where we just got the images, the colors, and then the styles. I think we can delete everything at the moment. I'll just get rid of these styles. Let's just, for now, put a text without any styling. And actually, before we end this section, I'd like to show you something else. Here, I'll delete everything, and notice how we are gonna get an error. First, let me do Ctrl-Z pretty quickly. So under the container, we had these classes. I'd like to just delete everything, but leave this container class. Okay, so let me put them side by side and reload my application. I'll press R. Okay, so if we delete the flex one, notice how what'll happen. Actually, I'll delete everything. And maybe we could get rid of the, let's say, screen options. The screen header, I should say. Let's say show header. Wait, is it called header shown? Okay, here I'll say, hide this. Say false. Okay, now as you can tell, the content is out of the safe area view. So this is what we call the safe area view. Anything within the, outside of the status bar, right? So here user cannot really see it because it is behind the camera. It is, it is in the status bar. So to fix this, we are going to create a component. I'll go under the mobile, just shrink everything, create the components folder, and I'll create a component called save screen. Let's say .jsx, and I'll get rnfe. Let's give a bit space and get started with it. So I'll just kill the left hand side, and let me just tell you what we'll be doing. We will basically take our entire application, which is this one, and wrap it with the, let's say, save screen. So this is something we will import. Let's save it. Put this tag, and then we will import the save screen. I know that this might look a little bit weird, but it'll make sense, I promise, just in a second. So we'll get that under the components, under the save screen. Okay, let's save. Currently it doesn't work, but we're gonna make that work. So here, basically we said that everything in our app should be under the save screen, where we would like to, put the content within the save area view. So here is what we're gonna be doing. We will take the children, which is our entire application, right? The stack. So we'll take the children and display it. And then we'll add some styling. I'll say style. Now we'll be using a custom package, or I should say just an external package that has already been installed when we create the Expo application. So you can double check that under the package JSON, and the package name is this one, React Native Save Area Context. So from here, we'll get a hook, say insets, and use save area insets. Now you'll see the output. Here I'll say, just give some padding from the top. Let's say padding top, it'll be insets.top. And let's give the flex to be 1. And then I'll say background color could be from the colors. Let's say it's going to be coming from this constant that we have. I don't know why we cannot see it. let's try to import it manually. I'll say import the colors from constants and colors file. Okay, so why this does not work? Okay, so I think my VS Code is kind of buggy. Let me fix that. So under the mobile, constants. Okay, really weird. But let's try to save it and give it a go. I'll say colors.use the background. Okay, let's save. Now, as you can tell, the content is within the save area view. If we didn't have this, let me delete this padding top. Now it is outside of it. So this will by default make sure that your content is within the save area view, right? Which is this container, right? So it is right here. So I hope that makes sense. This is a component that I almost always use in my React Native applications to get rid of this kind of effect, right? I don't really want my content to be invisible. So this is a component that I previously used as well in my previous React Native tutorial. Now this is but literally annoying. Okay, so I just paused the video and take a look at it. I think it's because we already have the colors coming from the app example, and we don't really need this folder. We can delete it. That was the boilerplate application from Expo. So we could literally delete that. Now probably and hopefully it should work out. Okay, so you can just delete that and bring this back. Now we don't really have that there. You can delete the text. Here we go. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this section. Just keep this component in mind. You can even put it in your notes because probably in your next applications, you would like to use something like this, right? And we have another option. You can put the padding bottom as well. If your content is overlapping with the, at the very bottom, I don't know how to call this, but you can just say padding bottom is going to be insets.bottom as well. And I think we have left and right too. Okay, so here I'll just have the top only, and hopefully I'll see you in the next section. So this is where we left. Now let's try to set up the authentication using Clerk. So you can find the link in the description. I'll go ahead and visit my dashboard. Okay, so if you go right here, click to the dashboard, and then you should be able to see your application. Just select that. This is the one that we have created. I'll select Expo, and we have already got the public key. First, let's import the package. I'll copy that, open up my terminal, and just make sure that you are under the mobile. So kill this, paste this in, and at the same time, you can set up your .env file. So I'll say .env. I think they also call it as local. Let's see. No, it is just .env. Not really that important, but I'll just put it as .env so that we have the exact same thing as documentation. And just make sure to put this file under the git ignore so that you don't really push it to GitHub. Let's see, just scroll to the very bottom. Just put .env so that it is also ignored. Okay, so I'll copy it and paste this in. I think we can delete it from the .env file under the backend. We don't really need it here on this file. Okay, now that we got the package, we can start the app with npx expo. Let's say reload. Kill this file. And let's move on with the steps. Okay, so they say update the layout, the root layout, right? So I will get this and update that file. So under the root layout, we use the stack. Instead, this time we will put the slot component, which is like the outlet if you have used it in React, right? We have outlet. So in React Router DOM or React Router, we had this component, which basically says put whatever page user in, right? So we'll get the slot from Expo Router. And then let's get the Clerk provider from this import. And then I think we forgot to, I accidentally delete the save screen. Let me put that because we still want to have our page to be under the save area view. Okay, so that's it for this step. Now we will get this package. So basically I am at the moment doing everything the documentation says. Import the Expo secure store and rerun the app. We can update the token cache. So these are some configurations that we are adding that Clerk needs behind the scenes to add a really robust authentication. I'll get this import as well, paste this in, and I think we should be good to go. Now we need to set up our files. So here we will create a group route or route group. Under the app folder, I will create this folder with the brackets. So we'll create this Auth, right? I will call this as Auth, and we can put our authentication screens within this file, within this folder. So here I'll have sign-in.jsx, and then I'll do the same thing for sign up. And then we will create a layout file, layout.jsx. So you might be asking, can we create more than one layout? Yes, absolutely. This is the root layout, and then this is the Auth layout. And you can create more and more for every single route that you have, for every single group, right? And then now let's copy this for the layout. This is what they say in the documentation. So under here, I'll paste this in. Basically, this will check if user is signed in or not. If they are signed in, we will take them to the homepage. But else we will show them the sign in page or the sign up page. Okay, let's save. And then the other step is to set up the sign up file as well as the sign in. Let's put them one by one. I'll basically copy and paste, and we will update these files. Let's do the same thing for the sign in. Okay, so this is what I have. I'll just paste this in. And then they have a sign up button. Let's copy it. Create that under the components. So we'll see everything just in a second. For now, follow along with me. And then finally, they have the homepage, which is the page if user is signed in or not, right? It'll, like, if they are signed in, they will see a hello text with the user email. I'll copy it. Now, instead of calling it as home, I will say root. So under the mobile, under the app, I'll say create this root route. And then I will put the index.jsx file, which is my homepage. So we can delete this one now. That was just for testing purposes. Let's put this. Let's say get the sign out button. So here we have an error because our components are not under the app folder. We can delete that. Now it should be working out. And then I'll create another file called _layout.jsx. So here we'll put something else that is going to check if user is signed in or not. So let me just pretty quickly provide this. I'll just paste this in. Let me walk you through it. So I just paste this in. Let me walk you through it pretty quickly. This is just a layout file where we check if user is signed in or not. If they are not signed in, we will take them to the sign in page, but else we'll show them the home page, right? Or whatever page they are in. So let's save and take a look at the output. Hopefully it'll work as expected. I'll reload my page. But first let's delete the about.jsx and reload it now. So we are not authenticated. That's why we are in the sign in page. So let's say sign in. So here, like, there is no styles at all, but we have a text input. Let me put my name or my email. So I think like this is email and this is password. I know that it's not really visible, but this is just for testing purposes that Clerk gives you. We will change it completely. So here we are in the sign in page. Let's go into the sign up. If you click to it, now we are in the sign up page. So let's take a look at the UI. We have a text input. This is for the verification. And then this is for the sign up. We have a text input where we can put the email and then the password, and then we can submit that. On press, it'll call this function, which is going to call the create method with the sign up, and sign up is coming from Clerk. right? And then we say prepare email address verification. And strategy is to send an email code, a 6-digit verification code. And then this is going to update the state so that we can see the verification UI. So let's pretty quickly go over it. I'll put the email that I have for testing purposes. Let's get this @ symbol, paste this in, and I'll say gmail.com. Now for the password, I'll put something like 123456. It should fail because this is a really weak password. If you open up the terminal, it says it should be at least 6 characters. Now let me put an actual secure password. Okay, so I'll just say continue. Now we got the verification code. Let's take a look at it from my inbox. So this is what we just got 0 minutes ago, and this is the verification code. Let me copy that and paste this in. And then I'll say verify. Okay, now we are logged in. We can see the home page, right? And if you take a look at the dashboard, if you just refresh that, you should be able to see that this user just signed up. So that means our authentication system works correctly. And by the way, when we had the verification page, this is what we have seen. It says just put your input, which is coming from the code. This is the state. Now this is super basic React code. I don't really know if you get confused, but basically we have some states. It is use state. We have, use router, just like in Next.js or React Router DOM. You navigate the user depending on the actions. And then we got some values and functions from Clerk. So for the verification process, here it says just attempt email address verification by passing the code. So if you put the wrong code, it is going to fail, right? And we will even check for that. Okay, so here it says if it is complete, just activate the account and take user to the homepage. This is exactly what happened. But in the else case, you can handle this. They just put a console log. Okay, so I hope all that makes sense. Now we'll go ahead and actually completely change the UI so that we could have this beautiful UI for these pages. So this is the sign up, the create account page, the sign in, and then the verification page. Okay, so this is what we'll be doing next. And just before we get into the next section, I think we forgot to save this file. Let's save it and try to, log out, which is coming from the sign out button file. Here, once you click to this button, once you click to this touchable opacity, it'll call this function called handle sign out, and it basically calls the sign out coming from Clerk, and then it'll just redirect to your desired page. This is not really important. It'll take you to the sign up page, right? So let's save and click to it. Now we are in the sign up page. So that means everything works correctly. Now I just logged in once again, and even if you don't have this line, it should still work. It should still navigate you to the sign in page. So I'll go ahead, click to it. Now we are signed out. Immediately we are in the sign in page. And how does that work? Well, basically under the home page, we have this layout, right? We say if user is not signed in, just take them to the sign in page immediately. Use the redirect component coming from Expo router. Okay, so this is something that we should keep in mind. And with that, in the next section, we will improve our pages. Alright, so this is where we left. In the previous section, we implemented the authentication in the most basic way. Now let's try to fix our pages because currently they look really, really ugly. So first we'll get started with the sign up page. Here, we'll keep all these states and functions, but here I'd like to add one more state for the error, right? I'll say error, I'll set error. Initially, it could be an empty string. So let's say use state, import that. And instead of react.useState, let me delete every one of them. And I'll just import useState from React. Okay, now we'll be using this, but first let's shrink everything and say, update the pending verification UI. So if you say like this is true, let me refresh our page. So I think we should visit the sign up page because this is where it'll happen. Okay, if this is true, this is what you're gonna see. Now we'll fix this. Normally you don't really want to put true, but for now, just to see the output, just to see the UI, this is what we're gonna have. So we will return a div, which is a view component, and then we'll say style is going to be equal to styles. Now this styles will be coming from the auth styles file. So let's say import the styles from, so why my VS Code doesn't really work for these suggestions, I don't really know. So from the mobile folder, we'll go under the assets. From here, we'll go under the styles, and then we will get this folder or the file, which is auth.styles.js, where we have the styles import, right? Okay, let's save and shrink the left-hand side. Now here I'll say styles.verification container. Okay, once you save, it'll be updated. And then for the text, I'll put the verification title class. Let's save. UI is just getting better, right? And then now we'll just check if we have an error or not. What I'd like to do, just copy and paste and walk you through it. Super simple, 5 lines of code. So we say if there's an error, display this UI, but else don't show anything, right? Let's import the colors. So this is absolutely annoying. Let me just say reload the window so that hopefully it works. Okay, it doesn't. Now that's fine, we'll import it manually, but here we are using an icon, right? So this is coming from Expo icons. Let's scroll to the top. So here I'll bring the import. It is coming from vector icons from Expo. So we have a bunch of different options. So like we are using ion icons, but we have like ant design. Let's see, do we have any other icons? So we have evil icons, material icons, bunch of different options. This is the one that we'll be using in this file. And let's import the colors as well from the constants. Okay, let's try to save, and I'll just say, let's have an error. This is the container that you would have. For the error, let's say, something went wrong. This is how it would look like. And you can close that obviously. For now, it doesn't really work, but we'll make that work because this is currently hard-coded. So basically, when you click to this close icon, it will set the state to be null so that this container is just disappears, right? Okay, I hope that makes sense. So that was for the error UI. Now let's move on. Here for the text input, we would like to update it. So we'll keep the value, the placeholder, the onChange, but for the for the styles, we can add some classes. Here I'll do something else that you have never seen before. I'll say style. Now instead of an object, this will be an array. Now why this is the case? Let's see. I'll say styles.verification input. So let me pretty quickly copy and paste. So this will always be applied, right? But we will say if we have an error, actually this should be a comma. I'll say if we have an error, only then apply this, which is the styles.error input. So you would use this array syntax whenever you have something like dynamic. So if we don't have an error, we will not get this class. Since this is false, we don't really get anything. But if it was true, the UI would be updated. Okay, so in this case, we're gonna put the error as the state. So let's save, the UI will be updated. Now I'd like to change the placeholder text. It is not really visible. So let me put this value. Now it looks pretty cool. And finally, we would like to update the button, right? The touchable opacity. Here I'll just say this style will be the button that we have under the styles so that we can get this output. And then for the button text, I'll say style is going to be styles.button text. Okay, so notice how if I visit the colors file and if I wanted to use the forest, everything is going to update easily, right? I can change to be ocean, and purple. Okay, so this is how easy it is to update our theme thanks to this, thanks to these files, right? As well as the styles. Let's go into the Auth styles.js. We are just using the colors, right? That could be background, that could be the white color, the border color, text color, everything is coming from these objects. So I hope that makes sense. I'll be using the copy by default. And now I also want to get rid of this header under the Auth file. Here I'll just say screen options, header shown to be false. Hopefully we'll get rid of that. Here we go. So that was the verification UI, but of course this is not going to be true. It is going to be pending verification. Only in this case you are going to see that UI. By default we would see the sign up page, the sign up screen, and now let's try to fix it. First we can get rid of this fragment that we don't really need. And in this view we'll have some classes. I think for now we can just say style is going to be flex of 1 so that it is taking the entire screen, and then maybe we can center that. I'll say like align content center it should be. Maybe justify content as well. Okay, maybe this should be align items. Okay, here we go, everything is being centered. We are going to change this a bit. For now let's move on. Here I'll have another view that is going to wrap everything. So I'll cut that, put it right here. And then for the styles, we'll use the styles dot, let's say, container. After this one, we are going to get the image. And in this case, I'll be using the second illustration that we have. So I'm just importing it from the assets. Let's import the Expo image. Here I'll just scroll to the top. I'll say import image from Expo image. Okay, so we have the image. For some reason it does not work. So I just paused the video and tried to understand why that was the case. It's because under the illustration class, we don't really have the width to be a fixed value. Previously it was 100%, so I just had to delete that and bring a value like 300. Once you have done the same thing, it should work out correctly. So we got the image. That means we can move on with the text. Here instead of sign up, I'll just say create the account with this class called title. And then within this, right after this one, we will put the exact same thing that we had above. So it'll be the error container. I'll copy it and just paste this in. Okay, so if we have an error, we'll just see it right here. And then we have the text input for the email. So here it says do not capitalize by default. So here we just had none. The value is the email address, the placeholder, as well as the on-change text. It'll basically update the state with whatever user passes, right? So I'll delete this and paste my version. It's the exact same thing. I just added the placeholder text as well as this style. Let's save. Now this is how that look. Let's do the same thing for the password. I'll copy it and paste this in. Okay, so here we have, let me save. This is the output that we have. Now you might be asking, how does that work that we don't see the characters? It's because we have the secure text entry to be equal to true. If it was false, you would see the password. Okay, so let's bring this back and it should be true. Whenever you change the value, it'll update the state for the password. And then for the continue text, I think we can delete that and just put something like sign up with the button class as well as the button text so that we can get this output. And then finally, we'll put a beautiful UI. So at the moment, I'm just copying and pasting. I can feel like it is a little bit annoying, but there is nothing related to React Native. These are just some, views, texts, and some classes. So that's why I'll just go ahead, copy and paste, and walk you through it. So we got a view with this class, and then the footer text that says already have an account. If so, you have this link or the button that will take you back. So if you click to it, you'll go back to the sign-in page with the router.back method. And the router is coming from Expo, router. So I'll click to it. We are in the sign up page and we can click to this one. We can go back. Now everything looks fine, but we actually have a problem. I don't know if you have realized it, but just press Command-Shift-K, bring the keyboard. So whenever you click to the, let me refresh the page. Sorry, just refresh the application. So whenever you click to the input, it is not really visible, right? Keyboard overlaps that. So to fix this, we have a couple of different options. There is a component coming from React Native called Keyboard Avoiding View. Now you can use this instead of the basic view that we have. So let's say Keyboard Avoiding View. So by default, it is not going to fix it. You had to add some options. So instead of doing that, I'll be using a package, which is this one. Let me pretty quickly show you this. So React Native keyboard aware scroll view. So it's really popular, and this is the output that you would have whenever you click to an input. It'll just scroll automatically because it is aware of the situation. So let's try to copy it and run this from our terminal. So it has just been installed. Let's run the application and we're going to set this up. So instead of this, we'll say keyboard aware scroll view, which is going to be coming from that package. Let me get the import and we can delete the link as well as this one that we are not using. So we're going to be using this from that package. Here, let's delete the styles. And for the style, we'll only have the flex of 1. And then we'll say content container style will be incremented, like flex grow of 1. And then we'll say enable it on the Android as well as enable the automatic scroll. And then now we can save and give it a go. Here, I'll refresh my application. Okay, looks like it crashed. Let's say press I, so it can run this. And I'll click to it. Now here we can see it just scrolls automatically. And if you click outside, it's going to close that. Same for this one, pretty cool. You can add even more things which are coming from the documentation. So I'll put something like extra scroll height. Let's say it'll be 100. So if you click to this one, it'll scroll even more, right? So we have 100 space, extra space. If you delete that, notice how it'll only scroll as much as needed, which is something that I'll leave. And I just opened the application in the Android as well as the iOS physical devices. So let's double check if it is working correctly. I'll click to this. It scrolls automatically, right? And for the password, keyboard scrolls and UI updates automatically. Same for the Android. Here you can see the keyboard doesn't really overlap with the input. Okay, now we can actually visit the sign-in page and get started with it. Currently, it looks really, really ugly. So I'll visit the sign-in page, and all we have to do is repeat ourselves because the functionality is already working. We'll just update the UI, right? So we previously checked that we can sign up correctly, successfully, and we can sign in. Okay, just to speed up the process, I'll go ahead and do some copy pasting, but I'll walk you through it 100%. So we'll get our import at the very top, and let's actually get the image as well from React Native. We'll be using that. So let's scroll to the bottom where we have this view. We are going to update it with the keyboard aware scroll view so that we have this beautiful scroll animation, right? The keyboard doesn't really overlap with the text input. Okay, so the other thing we'll have is the container view. Let me put that and wrap the entire application with it. And just make sure that this is called keyboard aware scroll view. Okay, so I'll get the container class on this view. The styles should be imported from the Auth styles. And then for the text, we will have something like welcome back. And just above that, we will have the image. So let's paste this in. This is what we have. If you wanted to, you can update the image, but this is what I'll have in the sign-in page. And then let's put the error container, just like previously, right after the welcome back text. I'll paste this in. Let's import the ion icons, get the colors, and let's create this error state. Let's say use state of null, but first let's delete those and say this is going to be use state. I'm too lazy to type this out. I'll just paste in. Okay, this is what we have. If we had an error, this would be the output. Okay, and then we'll update the text input, which is going to be for the email. Here, I'll go ahead, delete this one, paste this in. We have the placeholder, the placeholder and then the text color and then some styles. This is what we have. And then let's get the password. So this is the exact same thing that we have done in the sign up page. I hope you are not really bored just because we copy and paste, and I really hope that you are not angry because you don't really learn anything at this point. These are the things that you have learned a couple of minutes ago right here, right? Okay, so I'll just paste this in, and then I think we need to put the sign in button, which is going to be a touchable opacity. So I will just update that. This is what we have. On press, we are going to call the function that will log us in. And then at the very bottom, we will handle the navigation. So I'll delete this view, paste this in. Now here, if you put a single code, I think ESLint is going to give you a warning. So it says use one of these options to escape the single code. And here we are using add apos and then semicolon so that we don't really get any warnings. Really annoying, really stupid, but this is what ESLint wants you to have. So we have to listen to it. And then we have the link, and then we have the touchable opacity within that. That is going to take us to the sign up page. Let's try to sign in with the account that we have created. So I'll just kill the keyboard so that I can type this out pretty quickly. Now, for some reason, I cannot add the add symbol. I'll just do it in this way, copy and paste. Now, let's put the wrong password actually. So I'll put the wrong one. Let's see. Okay, it says password is incorrect, but I think we cannot see it because in the function, we didn't really handle that, right? So here, if we have an error, we only console log it instead of actually, instead of actually properly handling that. So for this, I'll go under the catch. Instead of just console logging it, I will paste this in. So what are we doing? We are just going under the code, right? Under the errors, under the code, we say if the password is incorrect. If this is the case, just set the error to be this value, but else just put something like a general message. Let's say UI should be updated. Here we go. But if it is correct, so I'll put the correct one. We should be logged in, hopefully. So is it wrong again? Let me double check. I'll put the correct one. Okay, looks like it's correct. Now we are logged in and navigated to the home page automatically. Now there is one more thing that I'd like to optimize in the sign up page. So let's try to see what I mean. If I try to sign up with the exact same email, so I'll just put this one. Let me get the add symbol. And I'll just put a password. Let's say sign up. Now, if you check the terminal, it says this email address is already taken. Please try another one. So we can double check this code as well. If this is the case, we can throw an error like this one. So for this, we'll go under the on sign up press, and under the catch, we can handle that. So I'll provide this to you. Here, I'll paste this in. Let's try to sign up. Okay, this is the case. So we hit the if check and update the state so that UI can be updated. If you click to this one, it'll be gone. Now, just to double check everything is working, I'll go delete this user and sign up from scratch so that we can see if the verify page is still working correctly. Okay, user has been deleted. We can go into the sign up page. Let me put a correct password. So if you put something like 123, you will get this error, which you can handle it. So all you have to do, just take a look at the terminal. Okay, I think we are not console logging it, but let's do it. So console log the error itself, sign up. Okay, you can basically take this error and put it into the terminal or into the UI. I'll skip that because I already show you how we can handle the errors. Let's try to actually put a correct password or a password that is going to be accepted. So it'll take us to this page. Let's get the verification code. Okay, so I just got that. Let me copy and paste. Let's say verify. We are in the home page, and from the dashboard, we should be able to see that user that is just logged in. Okay, so I think that's gonna be it for the entire authentication flow. We already built it, but we just had to update the UI. I think the most important thing that you should keep in mind from this section is this component, because otherwise you would get the strange behavior where the keyboard is overlapping with the content, right? With the text input. So this is definitely something that you should keep in mind for your next project. Okay, so I just closed every single file that we had. Normally I was going to end this section right here, but I just said, let me take a quick step back and try to explain everything that we have done so far, so you don't really get confused. So we just said that this app folder is special for Expo, where we have our navigation files. And we have some special files like _layout, as well as the index.jsx. Then we have some routes. So everything starts from the root layout, where we have handled the authentication thanks to Clerk. Then we have this save screen trick, which is a component that we have created so that our content is not overflowing with the status bar, right? We just added this insets top, which is going to be dynamic. Our content is always visible. Okay, then we put the slot component, which is going to render the currently selected content. And then we have the Auth pages that has a layout file, which is going to check for the authentication. So if you're signed in and if you want to visit the authentication pages, you cannot see that, right? It says if you are logged in, you will be redirected to the home page. And then we have the sign in and sign up pages, which are mostly coming from Clerk. So all we had to do is just update the UI, right? With this component and some icons, some error containers. And for the icons, we are using ion icons. And here's how that works. All you have to do, just add a name. So here we use the close icon, but you could use a bunch of different things. I mean, like all of them are coming from, ion icons. So literally thousands of different icons, and we'll be using a bunch of different icons. So this is the one called close that would give you this output. This one. And then we have like alert circle, which is this one. Okay. Then let's see what we have done. We have used this component, as I said, which is coming from this package. Otherwise, the keyboard is going to overflow the inputs. Then we did the similar thing in the sign up page. So there is no reason to explain this. Like, honestly, it feels like an English sentence. You can just read the comments. Everything should be pretty clear. We just handled the error cases just to have a better output. And then let's see, under the root, we have a layout file as well, This is going to handle the navigation, the redirection. If user is not authenticated, we will take them to the sign-in page. And then the home page content. Currently, this doesn't really do anything. In the next section, we are going to fetch data so that we can have this kind of a output, right? So this is the home page that we're gonna build in the next section. I hope everything makes sense so far. Like, I can understand if it is your very first time, some stuff could be really annoying and confusing, but I would say it's going to get a lot easier and a lot more, it's going to make a lot more sense as we go through the tutorial. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next section. Now it is time to get started with the homepage. So this is the end result that we're gonna have. Basically, we need a query so that we can get the balance. This is what we call the summary. And then we have the transactions. This is another get request. And then we are gonna need a delete request so that we can delete the transactions, right? So to be able to fetch those, we need to pass the user ID. Let's take a look at it. Under the server.js, under the routes, we say that if we want to get the transactions by user ID, we need to pass the user ID into the URL, and same for the summary. And if we want to delete one, we need to pass the transaction ID that we would like to delete, right? Okay, so let's keep this in mind and try to build those functions. Now for this, I will create a hooks folder, and we are going to create a custom hook called useTransactions.js file. So this has nothing to do with React Native. This is going to be a super simple React custom hook. Okay, so this is just a React custom hook file. It has nothing to do with React Native. Your React knowledge should be enough to build this entire file. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with it. First, I'd like to export this useTransactions hook. Let's say this is going to be an arrow function, and we would like to get the user ID as the argument. And then we are going to have a couple of different states. So let me just provide them to you. We will have the transactions state, which is going to be an empty array. Once we fetch it, it'll be an array of transactions like these ones, right? And then we're going to have a state to keep track of the summary, where we have the balance, income, and expenses, which is going to be an object. Let me provide that one as well. So we have the summary with balance, income, and expenses. By default, you can put anything. I'll just go with 0, and we will update them. And then for the loading state, we will have the true by default because we would like to fetch it immediately. Once we fetch that, this is going to be equal to false. Now I would like to create a variable. Here I'll say const API URL so that we don't really need to type this out again and again. So I'll say HTTP localhost 5001/API, which is our API URL, right? And then we're gonna have a couple of different functions. So first I'd like to say get the transactions. Let's say fetch transactions, which is going to be an async function where we'll have a try and catch block. Under the try, we can get the response by sending a fetch request to, let's just put backticks. We'll say API URL / it is a transactions, and then / whatever the user ID is. Let's put the user ID, and then we'll get the data. Let's say await response.json. Once we got the data, we can set our state with it. So I'll say set transactions with this data. And for the catch case, I'll just put a console log to simply handle this. Now we'll be calling this function under a use effect, and I'd like to optimize this function. So for now, I'll just cut that. Okay, so cut it with me. We'll say wrap this with a use callback function. Okay, so let's say use callback, which is coming from React. Now we can pass the function, and then as the dependency array, we will put the user ID. So whenever the user ID changes, it is going to recreate this function. So let me just put a comment. Let's say use callback is used for performance reasons. It will memorize the function. So it'll basically cache that. So if you hover over that, you can read it. It's the exact same thing that I just said. Now in the same way, I would like to create one more function that will get the summary. Since it's the same thing, I'll just paste this in. Super basic JavaScript code, right? Super basic React code where we wrap the function with the use callback hook. And then finally, we will have one more function to be able to call both of them at the same time. So I'll just paste this in. It is called as load data. So this function is going to call the fetch transactions as well as the fetch summary at once. So here we just say promise.all so that these functions can be run in parallel. Now, what do I mean? Like maybe as a beginner, you would do this. You would say instead of this entire thing, let me type this out. I'll say await fetch transactions. And then once this is done, just go ahead, fetch the summary. So you can do it in this way as well, but there is no reason to do it in this way, because here is how that works. First, you will run this. Let's say it'll take 2 seconds. Until this is done, you cannot call that. Once this is done, then you can call this, right? But it doesn't have to be. We can fetch this first or this one first, right? We can just call them at the same time. Whichever ends first, we're gonna get that. So instead of doing it in this way, I hope I have explained it clearly, but basically instead of doing in this way, you'd like to call them in parallel so that this doesn't have to wait for this one or vice versa. Okay, and then we are updating the loading state. Finally, we'll just say it's going to be equal to false. So these are the get methods that we have. At the very end, I will add the delete functionality. So I'll say delete transaction. This is a function that takes the transaction ID where we send a delete request to this URL. And if it is done, we will load the data again to refresh the UI. And now we are using the alert. Let's import it from React Native. So here I'll just scroll to the top, say import the alert from React Native. Let's say alert, it should be, okay. Now, depending on the success case or error case, will show an error or a success message. So you're gonna see this once we call this function. Okay. Now this is the entire hook. All we want to do, just go at the very bottom, still within the hook. Okay. Within the hook, we'll just say return an object with all these fields. So we would like to return the transactions, we would like to return the summary, the loading state, and then our functions, which is the load data as well as the delete transaction. Okay, so these are the only two functions that we will export, we will return. Now you might be asking, why don't we return this function as well as this one? Because they are called under the load data, okay? Now let's try to actually call this hook under the homepage. Here I'll visit the index.js file and let's try to, call that hook. I'll say use transactions, and here we would like to pass the user ID, right? This hook wants you to pass the user ID, and we can get that by doing user.id, which is coming from Clerk. And then we'll just say from this hook, we are getting a couple of different values, such as the transactions, we are getting the summary, we are getting the loading state, the load data method, as well as the delete transaction method or the function. Now what I'd like to do, just say under a use effect, call the load data. And then we'll just say, leave this as empty, but I think we are getting a warning. So let's say just add the load data. Okay, I'd like to console log this. So I'll say console log data is loaded, and we can get the transactions, or actually let's say transactions, and then let's do the summary as well. Okay, now looks like we got an error. Let's try to see why this is the case. I think it's because I am not running the backend. Here I'll go ahead, run this. Let's say cd backend and say npm run dev. Now if you're running the application from your physical device, you're gonna get into an error, and I'll give you the solution in a couple of minutes. But for now, just follow along with me. Go ahead, run the backend in the mobile. Now reload this app by pressing R, and I am logged in. As you can tell, we got the balance, expenses, and income. So it is working correctly. The only issue that we have, like let me display, I'll say console log user ID, and let's say user.id, which is coming from Clerk. We should be able to see it. Okay, so this is the user ID, but in our transactions, we put some test user IDs. Let me refresh. Okay, so let's try to actually put the correct user ID. So I'll paste this in, let's say paste this in as well. Now our balance should be updated. I'll go under the VS Code. Let's reload our app. Okay, so as you can tell, now the balance is actually coming from the API, right? That means everything is working correctly. Same for the transactions. Now we have done this manually, but this is just for now. Later in the video, once we build the create page, we don't really need to do it manually. It'll happen automatically. Okay, but now if you are following along with your actual physical device, you are gonna get some errors. And let me actually open up my camera as well as my phone and take a look at the error together. So I just scanned the QR code. Let's see what is the problem. Like I'll try to pretty quickly log in. So I put the credentials, I'll log in. Okay, so at the very end, it says network request failed. I don't know if you can read it, but like why this is the case. Now, the problem here is that I am trying to call the localhost from my actual device, right? Here in our code, let's take a look at it. Under the useTransactions, which is our mobile phone, here we say call the localhost. Now, when you call it from your physical device, that means like it understands that your backend is running on your phone, which is not the case. Localhost is your laptop, so it cannot connect to it. Let me actually visualize this under an image. So when you're running the simulator, it works because the localhost in this case means your laptop, right? It works correctly with your simulator. But if it is your physical device, localhost means this exact phone, which is not the place that our backend is running. Our backend is in our laptop. So to be able to fix this, we need to take our entire API and deploy it to the cloud. And this is exactly what we're going to be doing in the next section. Alright, so this is where we left. Now in this section, we would like to deploy our API. We have talked about it. Why? Because if you don't deploy it, you cannot really use this application from your physical device. You can use it from the simulator, but not on your physical device because we are calling the localhost. So we'll just deploy this API. First, I would like to shrink everything and actually kill everything that we have. I'll open up a new terminal and I would like to first push this code to GitHub because we'll be using a platform called render.com, which has a free plan. You don't need to pay anything. With this, we will deploy our API. To be able to use this, first we need to push our code to GitHub. So here I'll create a repository. Let's say the name could be something like Wallet API. I'll make it private. If you wanted to, you can go with public. It's not really that important. Okay, now let's try to create this as a Git repo. I'll say cd into the backend and just say git init. Now we don't really want to push our credentials to GitHub, right? So for this, I'll say create the .env file, .gitignore file, gitignore, and then we will say ignore the .env file as well as the node modules. Okay, let's save. Now they should be ignored, as we can tell. Now we can basically take everything and push it to GitHub. First, just make sure you have the start command, right? And then we can just say git add everything, git commit -m, which stands for message. Let's say something like initial commit and just, commit that. Now I'll go ahead and get this script this command, paste this in, is going to take the entire backend code and push it to GitHub. Okay, notice how we don't have the .env as well as the node modules, which is something that we want, right? We don't want them to be right here. Okay, so I'll go under the dashboard. I already have an account. Go ahead, create one, and then just say deploy a web service. We will select this wallet API. Let's grab our environment variables, by the way. I'll copy everything that we have, and we will paste this in under the environment variables. Now paste this in, don't change anything, leave it as it is. Scroll to the top, select the free plan, and then notice how it says the build command is npm install, which is correct, because if you think about it, when render takes your code, it doesn't have the node modules, right? First, it needs to install your dependencies. So it's gonna run npm install, and once it is done, it's going to run the server.js file. You can leave this start command as it is, or you can say npm run start. It's the same thing because this npm run start is going to do the exact same thing, right? Under the start command. Okay, so I'll just leave it in this way, and let's say deploy the web service. This will take around 1 or 2 minutes, and then it should be good to go. So I'll wait. Once this is done successfully, I'll just be right back. And actually, while this is deploying, we can copy this URL, which is the API URL that render gives us. So I'll copy that. I'll go under the VS Code, under the transactions, actually use transactions. Okay, so we are going to update this part because it's not under the localhost anymore. It is under this URL, right? Now, if you're following along with the simulator, you can even, you don't have to do it. You don't have to change this part. You don't have to deploy the API, but this is something that I wanted to show you just in case if you are following along with your physical device. Okay, now let's save this and let's wait for this to complete. It says your service is live, server is up and running, and database connected successfully. Now let's try to actually test this out from our physical device as well as the simulator. Okay, so I'll just save this code and kill the backend, which we don't really have already. I'll open up the application. Let's say cd into the mobile. I'll say npx expo. We can kill the backend, and I'll just say put them side by side. Reload the app. It should be working out correctly. Okay, so we can fetch those from our deployed API, right? It is coming from the deployed API. And if you refresh, this should say live. Here we go. Now I'll open up my camera and try to test this out from my actual physical device. So here I'll go ahead and scan the QR code. Now my phone is sending the request to this URL instead of localhost. So that means we don't really get that network error, right? So it can actually fetch the data. Now, even though we don't really display it in the UI, we didn't get any errors. Let's try to display it pretty quickly under the homepage, just to double check it is working correctly and you're happy with it. So here I can maybe right after the hello text, I could say create one more text. I'll just get the summary itself, and let's say we'll display the income. And let me say this is the income. Let's do the same thing for balance. And let's do it for the expenses. Okay, I'll save and let me open up my camera once again. So I can see it on the UI, it is right here. We got the balance, income, and expenses. And it's the exact same value that we have in the terminal under the database. Okay, so that was the solution. We had to update this part if we are following from our physical device, but if we are using the simulator, we don't really need to do it. So this is something that I wanted to mention and show you this under this section. And now I'll change this to be actually localhost because I am using the simulator. Now there is one more problem, by the way, before I change this. This API is going to be inactive every 15 minutes because we are using the free plan, right? The only downside with the free plan is that it'll go inactive. Now what does that mean? Let's say for 15 minutes you don't send a request. After 15 minutes you send a request to your API. It's going to take around 1 or 2 minutes for this to load. So here it says your free instance will spin down with inactivity, which is going to cause some delays, about 15 seconds or even more. So how can we fix this without paying anything? So there is something called cron jobs. Let me pretty quickly show you the solution. I will go under the backend. I will create a file called cron.js, and here I'll say under the backend. So let me say go under the backend and just say npm install the cron package. So this is going to install that, and you can find this file from the source code or actually from the GitHub gist. So let's find that. I'll say gist github.com. You can find the link in the description. Let's see where that is. You can find the cron.js file. Just copy everything and we're going to paste it. So like, what are cron jobs? I'll explain it pretty quickly. So they are some scheduled tasks that run periodically at fixed intervals. And in our case, we want to send one GET request for every 14 minutes so that our API doesn't go inactive, so that it is always up and running and it doesn't really get inactive, right? So when we send a request, we can immediately get response back. So here are some examples. I don't really want to waste any time. I have explained this previously multiple times. You can check this out, but basically our code is super simple. On every 14 minutes, we would like to send a request to our API URL, which is going to be this URL. So copy yours, okay? I'll copy that, and then I'll paste it under the environment. So here I'll say edit, add a new variable, API underscore URL, and paste this value in. And if it is done successfully, we're gonna put the console log. In the else case, we'll just say, whatever the status code is. So yeah, that's the entire code. Now we created this file, but we never run this. So here I'll go under the server.js and I will import this. Let's say import job from cron.js. And here I'll say if, I'll just say run the job.start. I only want to start this if we are in production. So here I'll say if process.env.nodeEnv, if it is equal to production, which means if we are deployed, if we are in the production environment, only then start the cron job, right? We don't really need to run this locally. And I would like to create one more route for testing purposes. Here I'll say app.get. We can say something like /API/health. So this is to check if our API is running correctly. I'll say request and response. And we can say something like res.status of 200. Let's say JSON. And we can just say status is okay. Okay, now we have some changes. We would like to deploy this to GitHub, and I'll copy this part as well because I'd like to add it right here. So whatever our API URL is, we'll say /API/health. Okay, I'll say save, rebuild, and deploy. And then I would like to change this code. Sorry, I would like to push this code to GitHub. Under the backend, I'll say git add all, git commit -m, let's say cron.js added, and I'll say git push. Let's see where that is. We just got the new changes, and this should redeploy that. So just go into the dashboard. Here we can see it is deploying it. The previous deploy has been cancelled because this new one is going to be deployed. So let's wait for this to be completed successfully. Alright, so it is done successfully, it is live, and everything should be working out as expected. Now we don't really need to run the backend from this terminal if you are using the physical phone, but since I am using the simulator, I will actually run that, and I will update this part with the localhost. So I'll comment this out, duplicate that, and let me say this is going to be localhost. Alright, so that's it for this section. Now you're able to follow along with me with your physical device if you don't have the simulator. So this is something that I wanted to add, and we have an error because I'm not running the backend. Let's try to run this. Let's say npm run dev and reload our mobile phone. It should be working out correctly. Here we go. So that's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one where we will get started with the homepage UI design. Alright, so this is where we left. Now let's build the homepage UI design. For this, we'll go under the index.js file and let's try to delete these console logs that we don't really need, and we can get started with the loading state. So here I'll say if it is loading, we can return a page loader component. So say page loader, which is something that we will create under the components. Let's say .jsx. Now this is going to be using a component called activity indicator. So basically we have a view that is taking this loading container style that is coming from home styles, and then we are using this component coming from React Native. So let's save and we'll see the output, and let's try to import it. Okay, so this is what we have while it is in the loading state. This is what you will see. I'll just make it true so that you can see it. Now you can change it. Now you can change the size. Let's say small. We have large. I think we have only large and small. I thought we also had medium, but I'll go with the large. You can change the color as well. Here we are using the primary color, but you could use anything that you wish. Okay, so that's it for this component. Now we can get started with the actual UI if we don't have the loading state, right? So we need to fix this part. The very first thing I'd like to add is this header component where we have the icon, the username, and two different buttons. So let's try to put them side by side and get started with it. Now I will delete everything that we have under this view. Let's say this is going to take the style, and from the styles, which is coming from the home page, home styles, we'll say get the container class. And then we can add one more view. Let's say this will take the styles.content, and then we can put the header component. So here I'll just say header. I'll have one more view. Let's say style is going to be styles.header. And then we can build the left hand side. So I'll say header left, and then we'll have the right side. So this is the left, and then this is the right. Okay, so under the left, I will have again a view. This is going to take the class name, or sorry, it's going to take the style called styles.header left, and then we can put the logo, which is going to be an image that I'd like to provide. Let's say import the image. I think this is going to be coming from React Native. You can also use the Expo, but we are basically getting the logo. Let's save. Okay, we just got the image, and then right after the logo, we can put the welcome container. So instead of typing this out, I'll paste around 4 lines of code, and let me walk you through it. We have a view with a text that says welcome, and then we grab the username. Now this is basically coming from the Clerk user. We are getting the email address. So let's say email address is this one at gmail.com. Oops. Let's say we are getting the part before the @ symbol. So this is how we do it with the split method. So that's why we can see the very first part as the username. And then right after this view, after the header left, we can put the header right. So here I'll go ahead, create a view, and let me actually copy and paste and I'll walk you through it. We have a touchable opacity. Let's import it. When we click to it, it'll take us to the create page. Let's get the router as well as the ion icons. So here I'll say const router. It'll be coming from use router from Clerk. Sorry, not Clerk, but Expo. Let's say use router from Expo router, just import that. And then let's get the ion icons from Expo vector icons. Now let's save, and what we're gonna see. Okay, so we can see the add button, which is going to take this icon. Now we can add more different things, like add circle, right? You can go with anything, but I'll go with the add, and color is going to be white. And then I'd like to fix this sign up button so that it look like this with an icon. So here I'll visit this component, which is coming from the components. Okay, why I cannot visit that? Let me just say sign out button and fix it. Fix the UI and then the functionality. So actually the function works correctly. All we have to do is just update the return statement. So we'll have a touchable opacity with the on press, but on top of it, I will add the style. Let's say styles, which is going to be coming from Auth styles, or I think from the home styles. Let's import that. I'll say styles.logout button. And then for the text, we will have the ion icons. Import this. We'll give a name. I'll use the logout outline. And then I'll say size is going to be 22. Color could be, from the colors, we will get the text color. Okay, so this is the output that we have. Now when we clicked it, I don't want to log out immediately. I would like to ask for a confirmation. So what I'll be doing is to delete this try and catch block. Here I'll say alert.alert, and there's also prompt, but I'll be using the alert. Here we'll just say first put the title. I'll say logout, and then we can put the message. Here I'll say, are you sure you want to log out? And then we'll have the actions. So here we'll have two different buttons, which is going to be an object. Let's say the text is going to be cancel, and then the style, which can be cancel, default, or destructive. This is going to be cancel, and we can duplicate this. This time it'll say logout. So you will see the output just in a second. Style could be destructive. Let's get this, and then on press. So once you click to it, we would like to call the sign out from Clerk. Okay, let's actually give it a go. I'll click to it. We got the confirmation thanks to this alert. If you say cancel, nothing would happen, but if you say logout, you should be logged out. Okay, so that means everything is working correctly. I'll just try to log in. And then we can build the balance card, which is going to be this component. So this is what I call the balance card. You can call this anything else, but this is the name that I'll be going with. So right after all these views, so after the header, but still within the content, here we'll just say create the balance card. And we would like to pass the summary into it. Let's try to create this component. Under the components, I'll say balance card.jsx. Now this doesn't contain any logic at all, so I would like to copy and paste. Please don't get mad. You can copy this from the repo, right, from the source code, but basically we just have some styles and then some text. We display the balance, the income, and then the the expenses. Okay, let's save and try to import that. Hopefully it should be working out as expected. There we go. And then after the balance card, we can put this text where it says recent transactions. So right after the balance card, I'll paste this in. We have a view with a text with these classes, and this is our title. Now it is time to actually display our transactions. So here we have a bunch of different transactions that we would like to display. And for this, we'll be using something called flat list. Now, if you remember back in the tutorial, I have actually talked about it. Here we said when it comes to lists in React Web, we would do things like, array.map, and for each item, display this UI. In this case, we would like to use the flat list in React Native for performance reasons. So we'll explain what they are, but first let's try to go outside of this content. So just shrink the content and go below to it. We will have the flat list component that is like the flat list component that we import from React Native. So it is this one that we got. This will take a couple of different props. First, let's add the style. I'll say it's going to be styles.transactions list. And then we can give the content container style as well. This is going to be styles.transaction list content, which is going to take some padding from the bottom. And then we can add the data that we'd like to map through, which is the transactions array. So why are we using the flat list in the first place? I'll just add two different comments. So flat list is a performant way to render long lists in React Native. It renders items lazily, only those on the screen. Now what does that mean? Let's say in our database we have 5 different transactions. We fetched all of them, but at the moment we can only see 5 different transactions, right? We only see 5, so we don't really want to render the remaining 495 transactions. So flat list will be doing this exact same thing. So it's going to only render the ones on the screen. The other ones that are not on the screen will not be rendered. Only as you scroll, it is going to render them, which is going to boost the performance. So this is something really important to keep in mind. The flat list component is, using it in this way is a lot different than doing something like transactions.map, and for each transaction, do something. This is a lot different than flat list in the performant way. Okay, so we got the transactions. Now we will say for every transaction, just go ahead and render item where it is this callback function. So we'll just say destructure the item. So this is what you would get by default. The React Native called this as item. So this is basically each transaction, and we would like to render something. So here I'll put brackets and I'll say, just go below so that we can have a little bit space. I'll say render the transaction item component, which is something that we will create just in a second. Okay, so we will pass the item, and then on delete, I will send the handle delete function. Again, this is something that we will create in a second, but first let's try to create this component. So under the components, let me go under the mobile, under the components, I'll say transaction item.jsx file. Now once again, this doesn't really contain any logic. I'd like to copy and paste and walk you through it. It's around 50 lines of code. So we got our imports and we got a constant that we will take a look at it. Basically, this will display an icon depending on the category. So if the category is food and drinks, you would see this icon, right? If it is bills, you would see this icon. For income, for the other category, so on and so forth. To be able to make that work, we create this object. So this is the category and then the icon name. So if it is income, which we can check, like if it is a positive value, it is income, and if it is negative, it is expense. And then we got the icon name depending on the item.category. Then finally we can display it. So let's actually take a look at it. I'll just zoom out. We have the view with the icon. So this will determine what you have on the left hand side. and then the title, let's say the category. So title, category, and then on the right hand side, we have this amount, and we are adding either plus or minus depending on the, depending on the category, if it is expense or if it is an income, then the created at date. And for this, we are importing the format date function from the utils. So this is something that we have created in the past. Okay, finally, when you click to this delete icon, you are going to call the onDelete with the item ID. So I hope this is not really confusing. This is super basic React. Basically, we have a bunch of different components and we display some data and adding some styles just to make it look nice. Okay, so you can pause the video, type this out, and try to understand what is happening. Once you have done this, we can actually import this. Now for the handle delete, let's try to create it. It's a pretty basic function where basically I would like to ask for a confirmation. Here I'll say const handle delete, and I can zoom in. So this will be a function where we get the ID. And I'll just add an alert, just like what we have done in the signout file. So delete transaction, are you sure? If so, just go ahead, call the method. In the cancel case, don't do anything. Now I'll click to it, and I think like these icons does not really work. We will fix it. So I'll try to delete this one, say cancel, nothing happens. But if I say delete, it says success and page has been refreshed. So that means it is working correctly. Now when it comes to icons, it doesn't really work because in the database for the category, we just have income and expense, right? But they should actually be something like, transportation, shopping, entertainment, so on and so forth. Let's try to fix them. I'll go under the database. Let's refresh. Here for the expense, I'll say transportation. And then for the income, we can just say income, but with uppercase I. Save the changes and take a look at the output. I'll refresh. Oops. Open up the terminal and refresh this page. Okay, so icons have been updated because it check with this object. If it is transportation, you will get the car icon. If it is income, you would get the cash icon. Now we could add more props to the flat list. So what happens if we have an empty list? So I'll say list empty content. In this case, we can show something like no transactions found, which is a component that we will create. So do I have any images for that? Looks like I don't, but if we don't have any transactions, we will say something like, you don't have anything, go ahead and create one. So let's try to create this under the components. I'll say .jsx. Again, content is only UI, no logic at all. I'd like to paste this around 30 lines of code. So when user clicks to this touchable opacity, we will take them to the create page. Let's save and give it a go. Import this, and here I'll say the transactions is an empty array just to test this out, and this is the output that we have. If you click to it, you'll be under the create page, which we don't have at the moment. Okay, but for now, let's bring this back and try to add different props. So here I'll say shows vertical scroll indicator. We don't really want to show the scroll indicator, so I'll just say false, so that it is never visible on iOS or Android. But we can still scroll through this component even though indicator is not really visible. Now, I don't know if you have realized, but we have a different behavior. So it is kind of strange. Now, when you reload the app, even though we are logged in, it first shows us the sign in page for a split second. So I'll refresh. So first we see the welcome back page, and then we are navigated to here. So to be able to fix that, I will go under the root layout and I'll say, first kill the left hand side. Let's say getD is loaded from Clerk, and I'll say if it is not loaded, if Clerk is not loaded, please don't return anything, so that I don't have this strange behavior. Now I'll refresh. So immediately we would see the loading spinner instead of the sign in page. Okay, so I'll add a comment. Let me just say, this is for a better user experience, and save this file. Now, just before we end this section, I'd like to show you one last thing, which is about the refresh functionality. So when we do this thing, it should refresh, right? How can we add this functionality? Well, basically, under the flat list, we have something called refresh control. So here I'll say refresh control, and I'll say refresh control, call this from React Native. And then this is going to take the refreshing state. Let's say it's equal to refreshing, which is something we will create, and then on refresh function. Let's say on refresh, and paste this in. Okay, so these are the things that we will create. If you delete them, let's see what'll happen. Like, nothing happens. It actually breaks the application. So let's reload it. And I will bring this back with Control-C. Now let's try to create those. So this is going to be a state, and this is going to be a function. I'll just scroll to the top. I'll say const refreshing, set refreshing. Let's say use state, if I can type correctly. By default, this is going to be equal to false. Once we refresh that, we'll make it to be true. And now let's create our function called onRefresh. So onRefresh is going to be an async function where we would like to update the state. We'll say set refreshing to be true. And then we would like to fetch the data. So we would like to load the data from scratch because we are refreshing. And then once this is done, we'll say set refreshing to be equal to false. Okay, so I'll save and let's give it a go. I'll refresh. Now here we can see it is refreshing, but since loading state has been updated, we can see the entire page loader. To get rid of this, I'll say if you are loading and if you are not refreshing, only then show the page loader. Now here we can see the the refresh control itself. Now let's actually see if it is getting the latest data. So I will go ahead, update the expense in the database. Let's say it'll be just 1000. Save the change and try to refresh. Okay, here we can see it's been just updated. So with this out of the way, I think we have completed the entire homepage where we have the header component, we got the balance card, and then the transactions. And for this, we have used the flat list, which is a really cool component for the performance optimizations. Okay, so with that, in the next section, we're going to get started with the create page. Now it is time to get started with the create screen, where we have a header component at the top that we can go back to the homepage, or we can save the transaction. So we have two different selections, right? And then two different input elements, and then the category grid. So with this in mind, let's get started with it. We would like to create a file called create. So I will create it under the root. This is going to be our screen. Okay, I'll just shrink the left hand side and let's say RNFE. Let's try to, format this. I'll just say create screen and then get started with it. Now I'll give you like an array of categories. So we have the ID, name, and icon. So we'll be using this array to display these items, right? So in total we have, I think, 7 different items. So this is exactly what we have. So we'll use this in a couple of minutes. And then I'd like to get the use router from Expo router. I'll paste this in, let's import it. I'll just scroll to top, let's say import from Expo router. And then I'd like to get the user from Clerk, because we would like to get the user object. This is the currently authenticated user, right? So I'll get it from Clerk Expo. And then I'll add a couple of different states. So let me import the use state from React. So we are going to keep track of the title, the amount, selected category, if it is an expense or not. And my mouse is, I think, dying at the moment. The battery should be dying. That's why it is a little bit laggy. But let's move on. Okay, if it is an expense or not, and the loading state. So by default, the expense will be selected. And then I will create a function called handle create. So this will handle the creation of the transaction. I'll say it'll be an async function where we can get started with it. So first, let's fix this. Now first, I'd like to add some form validations, right? So here I'll say validations. I'll add the if check. We'll say if there is no title, we'll say please enter a transaction title. And this alert is coming from React Native. And then like I'll have a couple of different if checks. First, I'll say if amount is not a number, or if it is less than 0, we'll just say please enter a valid amount. Now, if it is an expense, we don't want them to put something like, minus 100. Instead, they'll just select the expense and put 100. We will convert this to be minus 100. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. That's why we have this if check. And after this one, I'll add one more thing. So if user did not selected a category, right? If there is no category selected, we'll say please select a category. And then we can actually get started with the logic. So I'll have try, catch, and finally. So in the finally, we'll just update the loading state to be equal to false. And then in the try, we will send the request, right? Maybe before here, we could just say set is loading to be true. So first, I'd like to format the amount. So I'll say formatted amount. If it is an expense, we will get the value and just put a minus in front. But else, we'll get the absolute value of it. So it'll be positive. And then we would like to call the API. So here I'll say const, let's say response, and I'll say await, fetch. Now here we would like to put the API URL, which is something that we have used under the useTransactions. Now instead of putting it here, I will create a file for this. So under the constants, I'll just say api.js, and I will cut this from here. And just in case you're looking at the source code, I'll leave it here for now as a comment. I'll paste this here and just say export this one. And then here we would like to import this so that the useTransactions doesn't fail. And then I'll be using the same thing here on this file. Now it is coming from the api.js. So I'll add my backticks. Let's say API URL imported from the constants / transactions. We would like to send a post request. So I'll say method is going to be post. And then for the header contents, for the header, we'll just say, application JSON will send some JSON data and it'll be under the body. Let me paste this in. We will stringify this object where we send the user ID, title, amount, and category. If you take a look at the server.js file under the controller, under the post method, these are the fields that we are expecting, right? Title, amount, category, and then the user ID. And then right after this response, so here I'd like to say if response is not okay, that means something went wrong. We can get the error data. So this is what I'll be doing, and then I'll just throw the error so that I can catch it under the catch block. But else we would like to just show a success alert, and then I will take the user back to the home page. Okay, in the catch, I'll put the console log as well as put an alert with the error message. And we can console log it just like this. So that's the entire function that we need. Super simple, nothing complex. We just send a fetch request, right? And then we have some validations. Now we would like to call this under the UI when we click to this save button. Okay, let's try to build it now. So first I'll say this view will get the style from the styles, and this should be coming from, let's import it. I'll say import. I think this should be wrapped with curly braces. And I'll say from, let's go one up, one more under the constants, under the, sorry, not constants, it should be under the assets. Let's find it. So assets, styles, and then create page styles, right? So here we'll say styles.container, and then this is not going to be a text, but instead it'll be the view for the header. So I'll put the comment, let's say style is going to be styles.header. Now instead of typing this out, we have done this multiple times, so I'd like to just paste and walk you through it. So we have the view for the header, and then a touchable opacity, let's import it, and then ion icons, we'll import that as well. Let's get the colors. Then now let's try to import the ion icons. So I'll just scroll to the top, get my import, and we can save it, and then let's take a look at the output. Okay, so this is what we got. This is the back button with the arrow back icon. Then we got the text in middle, and then the touchable opacity that will save the transaction. Now we are adding the loading state. So let's say if it was true, it is going to be disabled. And then if it was true, we would see saving. And if it is not loading, let's actually say like false, or sorry, let's say true. So this is what you would see. But for now, let's bring them back. We are going to see this in action once we actually submit the form. And then after the header, so I'll just shrink this. I'll say create one more view with the style to be styles.cart, where we would like to put the selector. So I'll say styles.type selector. Here we'll have two different selectors, either expense or the income. And this entire thing is called as cart, right? So this entire thing is cart. Okay, so under the type selector, I'd like to first put the expense selector. That will be a touchable opacity. So just paste this in, let's save. Okay, right next to it, we'll like to put the income selector. So these are the things that we have done multiple times. That's why I'd like to just copy and paste. Let's say income selector. Let me just walk you through it pretty quickly. We have this style will be applied every single time, right? No matter what happens. But if it is expense, only then this would be applied, which says it is active, so that we can have this styling. Otherwise, this is how it'll look like. Same for the colors, and same for this text as well. Okay, it's the exact same thing for the income selector. Now we would like to put the amount container. So right after the touchable opacity and after this view, which is the type selector, we will paste the amount container. Let's import the text input. Okay, so this is the UI. So we have the amount as the state for the value, and on change we will update that state, and the keyboard type is numeric. So if you say Command-Shift-K, you will see that the keyboard is actually numeric. Okay, and then right after the amount container, we'll have the input container. Let me copy and paste. So right after this one, so please feel free to pause the video and type this out. Super simple, no logic at all. Right after the input container, we can put the title for the category. Okay, now we are gonna map through the categories, which is this array that we have at the very top. So right after the text, I will have a view. Let me give a little bit of space. This will take the style as the styles.category grid. Now here, I'll just say categories.map. Let's get every single category, and for them, we would like to return this content, which is going to be a touchable opacity. I'll paste this in. Let's save and give it a go. Now, if it is selected, okay, my mouse is really annoying. If it is selected, as you can tell, styles have been updated, right? So these styles are coming from these lines where we say if it is the selected category, go ahead, make it active. Same for the color, right? If it is selected, make the color to be white. Otherwise, it'll be this text color. Otherwise, it is white, right? Either white or this text color. And same for the, let's see, for the text, right? Okay, so that's the entire UI. I think right after these views, so just above the container, I'd like to paste this in where we'd like to put an activity indicator. So if it is in the loading state, I'll just say true. Okay, what is happening? So I just realized this should be activity indicator, not based. So let's delete that. And now it should be working out correctly. So if we are in the loading state, we would like to see this for a split second. Let's say is loading. So we have built everything. Let's give it a go. I'll say I'll have an expense for food and drinks. Let's say it is 100, and I'll say, let's say KFC, and I'll save. Okay, looks like it failed. Do I have my backend running? Yes, I have. Let's see, it says failed to create. So why this is the case, let's see. So I just paused the video and put a console log right here, and when I say save, on the terminal I see that it says all fields are required. So let's see, visit the server.js file. Here under the post method, we are expecting user underscore ID. But here we just send user ID, right? Let's make this to be user underscore ID and test this out. Hopefully it should work out. I'll say save. Okay, now we got the success message. If we refresh this page, it is right here. And of course, it would be in the database as well. So it has just been created. Okay, now let's open up our application. Let's try to add one more thing, which is going to be income. This was an expense, as you can tell. Let's say income, I'll say something like 1500. Let's say salary. Let's say income and save. Balance has been updated. It is added. Let's refresh. Okay, so it is working correctly as well. I'd like to delete one of them. It works successfully, and we can log out, we can refresh. I think our entire application works correctly without any issues. So I think that's the entire application. Now, just before we end this section, I would like to visit the root layout, and I'd like to mention something else. So the root layout is this one, the one that is directly under the app, right? So here I will add the status bar. I would like to say get the status bar component, but I'd like to import it from Expo. I think it's a lot better to use. Let's say Expo status bar. Now we can add the style because currently this is in the light mode, which is not really visible. So this is white. I don't know if you can see it from the video, but I can barely see it. Here I'll say make this to be in the dark mode. Let's save. Now we can change the theme, right? We can say light, which was the default option. And I think there's also inverted and then auto, but I'll go with dark so that it is visible in this theme. And if we change the colors, let's see if it is still visible. So I'll say forest. So the dark theme will almost always work in our themes. So we can go with the ocean as well. Okay. So that was one more component that I wanted to mention, and you can put it under the root layout because it'll always be in your entire application. So with this, that's gonna be it for the entire tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. We built an entire API as well as the mobile application. We connected them. We even deployed our API. Now that was the URL. I'll copy it, paste this in, and let's say /API/health. We should get something like okay. And as you can tell, we don't have any delays at all because we are sending that, cron jobs, the get methods. If you go under the logs, you should be able to see that like get request sent successfully, which is happening every single 14 minutes. Like, can you see? There's always like from here 14 minutes, 14 minutes, so on and so forth. Every single time there is a 14-minute cron job that is set it up thanks to this file that we have, right? So in every single 14 minutes, we will send a request so that this doesn't get inactive. So if you think this tutorial was helpful, just let me know in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.